Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. We had teams looking for him, but with the sun setting and now this fog, the chances of finding him were getting slimmer by the minute. David, where are you? I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. It's in here with me, he whispered. The signal crackled, his voice distorting. Then clearer this time, it knows my name. A sharp chill crawled up my spine. David, what do you mean? But the radio went silent. I exhaled, glancing out at the fog-shrouded trees. Every instinct told me to report back to base. Wait for morning. But I couldn't ignore that call. I was a ranger. People's lives depended on me. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, took one last look at the empty ranger station, then stepped into the fog. The moment I stepped into the fog, the world changed. The air was thick, damp, clinging to my skin like cold fingers. My flashlight barely cut through more than a few feet ahead. The trees, once familiar, now loomed as twisted silhouettes, their branches contorted like grasping hands. The usual night sounds, crickets, owls, the rustling of leaves were gone. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I kept my rifle close and moved carefully, my boots sinking into damp earth. David, I called, my voice swallowed by the mist. If you can hear me, keep talking. Nothing. I pressed forward, heart hammering. Every now and then I thought I saw movement. A flicker of shadow just beyond my light's reach. The sensation of being watched grew stronger. Welcome to Old Hillbilly Horror Podcast. Before the show starts, do write below where are you from. And also do like this video and click on the bell icon. Thank you and enjoy. I've worked at National Park for 5 years, and in that time I've seen plenty of strange things. Hikers swearing they saw something watching them. Campers waking up with scratches. They couldn't explain rangers finding trails that shouldn't exist. But nothing ever made me want to leave. Until now, it started with the fog. I was wrapping up my shift when it rolled in faster than any storm I'd ever seen. 1 second, the forest was bathed in the amber glow of a setting sun. The next, a wall of white swallowed the trees whole. It was too thick, too sudden. Even the air smelled wrong, like wet stone and something faintly metallic. How much for my radio? Base. This is Carter. We've got an unnatural fog settling in. Visibility is almost zero. Do we have any weather advisories? Static. I frowned and adjusted the dial. Base, anyone read me? More static. Then, just as I was about to give up, a voice crackled through. But it wasn't dispatch. Ranger. The voice was choked, barely above a whisper. Help me, please. I straightened my pulse, kicking up a notch. Who is this? A pause. Then shakily, David Langley. I felt my stomach drop. David Langley was the hiker who'd been reported missing that morning. A routine day hike turned into a search and rescue operation when he failed to check in. My skin prickled, instincts screaming at me to turn back. But then a sound. Not a voice, not a rustling in the trees. Something worse. The slow, wet breathing. I froze. It was close. Too close. The fog shifted, curling unnaturally as if something massive had just exhaled. My grip on the rifle tightened, my pulse drumming in my ears. Then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. They crunched over twigs and dead leaves, circling just outside my vision. David. I tried again, my voice lower now. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched. And then, not David. The voice didn't belong to any man. It was deep, wet, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. My stomach turned ice cold. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, and for a split second I saw it. Tall, thin, wrong. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending the wrong way. Its skin, stretched and mottled, looked raw, like something recently skinned. And its face, no eye, no mouth, just a smooth, featureless expanse. But it knew I was looking. The thing tilted its head. I fired. The gunshot split the silence, the blast momentarily tearing through the fog. I saw the thing recoil, but there was no blood, no scream. Just a shuddering twitch, like I'd only annoyed it. Then it took a step toward me, and another. I turned and ran. I ran blindly through the fog, branches clawing at my arms, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The thing was behind me. I could hear it moving heavy steps that somehow barely disturbed the forest floor. It wasn't running. It didn't have to. I wasn't escaping. I wasn't supposed to escape. My boots skidded on wet leaves as I stumbled, barely managing to stay on my feet. I forced myself to focus. Panicking would get me killed. I needed to get back to camp, call for help, anything. Then a voice ahead. Ranger Carter. My blood turned cold. It was Jonah, or at least it sounded like Jonah. I slowed, my flashlight shaking as I swept the beam forward. A figure stood just beyond the mist, his shape flickering in and out of focus. He was wearing Jonah's uniform, standing perfectly still, his head slightly tilted. Something was wrong. Jonah, my voice was barely a whisper. Ranger Carter, the voice repeated, same tone, same inflection, like an echo that had learned to speak. My finger hovered over the trigger. Where's Grace? The figure didn't move. Where's marker pressed? Silent. Then it grinned. It didn't move its mouth. It just shifted its entire face, stretching the skin, bending in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The grin was too wide, too sharp, too unnatural. I fired. The bullet tore through the figure, but there was no blood, no impact. Just a ripple, as if I had shot into water. Then it blinked out of existence, the fog swallowing the space it had stood in. A whisper curled around my ear. You should not be here. I turned and bolted. The fog thickened, pressing in on me, and I realized the forest had changed. The path I had come from was gone, replaced with trees that hadn't been there before. The terrain was wrong, shifting under my feet like something was breathing beneath the soil. And then I saw them carvings. Dozens of ancient symbols etched into the trees. Their meaning unknown, their presence undeniable. Their shapes seemed to pulse as if alive. Some looked humanoid, others like impossible creatures with too many limbs, too many eyes. And at the base of the largest tree, a totem. It was made of bone, old, yellowed, and brittle, stacked in intricate patterns. Some were animal, some were human. Then I heard the laughter. Not from behind, not from ahead. From above. I lifted my flashlight, and my heart nearly stopped. The shape was clinging to the highest branches. Long limbs wrapped around the trunk, its body bent at unnatural angles. It had no face, only smooth, stretched skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. It knew I was looking, started to climb down. I ran. I didn't think. I just moved, tearing through the undergrowth, my body screaming at me to get out. The thing above me was fast. I could hear it moving through the branches, impossibly quick, keeping pace. It wanted me to run. It was playing with me. I forced my legs to move faster, dodging between trees, barely able to see through the fog. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the forest itself was trying to hold me in place. The symbols on the trees flickered as I passed, like they were reacting to my presence. And then I hit something. Not a tree, something soft. I staggered back, my flashlight tilting upward. The body strung up between two trees, arms stretched wide, its head tilted forward. Skin pale, clothes tattered. Jonah, my stomach lurched. His reindeer uniform was soaked in something dark. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. He was alive. Jonah, I grabbed his arm. His skin was ice cold. What the hell happened? Who did this? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, wrong. Then his lips parted just slightly. And in a voice that wasn't his, he whispered, "It's coming." A crack sounded above me. I dived forward just as something heavy slammed into the ground where I had been standing. Dirt exploded outward, my ears ringing. I turned, my heart hammering. The thing had dropped from the trees. It was standing tall, too tall. Its limbs were long and thin. Its skin stretched tight over its frame. Its face, or what should have been a face, was featureless, save for deep vertical slits where its mouth should be. It stood perfectly still, its head tilting slightly as if studying me. I couldn't breathe. Then it moved, not stepped, but glided. It was suddenly closer, its arms twitching at its sides. The slits on its face quivered. I didn't wait for it to get closer. I raised my gun and fired point blank. The shot echoed through the trees. The creature jerked. For the briefest second, I thought it worked, that the bullet had done something. Then its body shuddered, like reality itself was trying to correct something that shouldn't exist. The bullet wound closed. It took another step. I did the only thing I could. I ran. Jonah's whisper echoed behind me, mixing with the thing's heavy, dragging footsteps. "You should not be here." Branches tore at my arms as I sprinted through the trees, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The thing behind me wasn't running. It didn't have to. It knew I couldn't escape. It was hurting me. I could hear it just out of sight. A shifting presence moving through the fog, always there. The slits where its mouth should be had quivered before it moved, like it had been tasting the air. I had one bullet left, but I already knew. It wouldn't matter. The fog thickened around me and the forest changed. The trees became twisted, their bark blackened and curling like burnt paper. I saw the same strange symbols carved into them, glowing faintly. They weren't random. They were marking something. And then the trees opened up. I stumbled into a clearing. A circle of stones stood in the center, arranged in a way that made my stomach twist. Ancient. Wrong. The fog curled unnaturally around them like it was alive. Something was buried here. I turned, just in time to see Jonah step out from the tree. Except it wasn't him. His head was still tilted forward, his movements slow and deliberate, like a puppet on loose strings. The wound on his chest was gone. His eyes were black. The thing behind me hadn't followed me into the clearing. But Jonah had. His mouth opened, too wide, stretching at the corners. And in that same moment, not his voice, he whispered, "You need to finish it." I took a step back. Finish what? Jonah's black eyes flicked to the stones. My gut clenched. The thing wasn't chasing me, it was forcing me here because something else was waiting, and I had just walked straight into it. I couldn't breathe. Jonah... Asterisk if it was Jonah. His steps were stiff and mechanical. His head tilted even further back until it was almost at an unnatural angle. The skin on his face stretched and the slits in his mouth seemed to widen. Finish it. I felt the weight of those words crush me like the fog had become something more than just air. The stones were just ahead, their edges sharp in the dim light. The mist curled around them, thickening as if they were drawing something in. I looked back at the trees. The creature hadn't followed me into the clearing, but it was still there, somewhere hidden in the mist. Watching, waiting, it knew what I had to do. The air was heavy and alive. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't dare make a sound. The stone circle felt like a trap, one I had walked into without realizing it. Jonah knew whatever it was reached for me, fingers long and twisted like claws. I couldn't move. I heard something. A click. A whisper soft and delicate, like a distant song. I turned, and standing across from me, partially obscured by the fog, was the totem. The one Mark had spoken of. The one that hadn't been there before. Carved into the stone were the same symbols as those on the trees. Ancient, unfathomable, and surrounding the totem were shapes. Shadows flickered, fading in and out like they couldn't hold their form. The thing in the fog, the one that had been pulling at us, twisting our realities, I finally understood. The totem wasn't just a monument, it was a gate. It was holding the creature in this world. Shona's twisted form reached out again. You need to stop it. Break it. I took a step forward, then another, my breath catching. The fog seemed to shrink back, as if the thing was scared of me moving closer to the totem. I had no choice now. With trembling hands, I raised my rifle and aimed at the totem. The creature, the thing in the fog, was growing desperate. Its movements became erratic. The slits in its face twitched, expanded. The thing wanted to stop me, but it couldn't. I pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the totem with a sharp crack. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath me shook. The sky overhead seemed to ripple. The fog screamed. Everything twisted. The totem began to crack. The fog howled, its form changing, stretching in agony. The black shapes around us wavered, revealing the skeletal remains of those who had walked here before. Their bones crumbled away like dust lost to time. I stumbled back, shielding my face from the rush of air. The totem collapsed. The creature screamed. And then it was gone. The fog lifted slowly at first, then all at once. In the clearing, it was silent. The trees were still. I stood alone. If you go into the woods and come across a lone woman, ignore her, even if she knows your name. So no one believes me. I try to warn them, but no one believes me. I'm a park ranger. Legally, I can't give away too much information. I work close to the Adirondacks. I don't know if this happens all over the country or not. Hell, maybe it happens all over the world. But I'm giving you this life-saving advice, just in case this isn't a local phenomenon. My name is Peter. Well, not really, but for the sake of this story, it is. I'm not giving out my real information, because when I started this job, they made me sign an NDA. I started as a park ranger 6 months ago. They showed me the ropes pretty quickly. And due to COVID, a lot of people went camping this year as a way to hang out with friends. As people tend to do, they would drink and get themselves hurt or lost, so we went on a lot of search and rescue missions. If I'm being honest, more searches than rescues. I still remember the first day I learned about these women. We got called to find a couple in their 20s who wandered away from their group for a few hours, so we had to go find them. I went out with my supervisor, Jane. She's the toughest person I know. She won't take anything from anyone and can easily kick my ass. So anyway, it was around 4 p.m. We're deep in the woods, closest to their campsite. The couple probably went off for a quickie and got lost. People do that all the time here. So we walked for a while, and out of my peripheral I see a figure whom I assumed was the woman we were looking for. I saw dark brown hair and blue from her clothes. "Help me, please," I could hear her say, weakly. I assumed it was her. It sounded close to my ear, but Lee was yards away from me. As I went to turn to face the girl, Jane grabbed my head and turned it back forward. "You don't want to do that," she says as she continues to push me forward. "But there's a girl," I've said as I tried to turn my head again. She turns it back forward, with more force this time. "I'm aware, newbie." So poking forward, she says with a sharp shove forward to my shoulders, "What's your name?" Jane called into the forest. Her harsh voice echoed in the trees. The girl didn't answer the question. "Help me, please." "I really need help," the girl pleads. Kid and I continue walking forward. Tell me your name and I'll help you, Jane commands. Please, I just need your help so bad. Come on, Peter, please, the girl begs. I stopped in my tracks and looked at Jane. She said my name. She might know me. We have to go help her, I protested. If you want to go, you're going alone and you won't come back. I know not to disappear because you want to play hero and damsel, she said with anger in her voice. I listened to my commands, and I'll be honest, at the time I felt guilty, but now I'm glad I did. So we found the missing couple, returned them safely to the camp, and Jane and I went back to the station. Want to tell me what that was about? I asked Jane angrily. It's a long story. She said dismissively. I pressed the topic. I've got time. Tell me. I challenged her. She sighed and made me promise not to tell civilians. But I don't feel right keeping it to myself. I don't know what they are, honestly. My superior didn't even know, and he worked here 50 years. On day one, he told me about a girl who needed help. Don't look at her until she tells you her name. Why? They don't have names. They don't know how to make one up. Or maybe they don't know what the question means. Maybe they even think they're so powerful they don't need one. But they will do anything to get you to look, ask for help, ask for sex, say they know you, your mob details of your family. Anything to get you to look. She summarily spun the tale. What happens if you look? I asked her. I had the same question. My superior, Felix, didn't know either. He does now, but isn't really around to tell. All we know is that if they're able to get you to look, you walk off and you don't come back. She said, what happened to Felix? I asked. When I said his name, a pained flicker crossed her face, the only time I saw her express anything other than anger until this point. He looked. We're looking for someone's stupid lost dog. He was in front of mine, and from behind us we heard a woman whisper the name Felix. When that didn't work, the voice changed to a child's voice and we heard a panicked little girl call out Gampa. It was imitating his granddaughter who had drowned in the swimming pool 4 months earlier. I couldn't stop him. He turns and whispers, Albright. I knew the exact moment he laid his eyes on it. His pupils got huge, like he was rolling and his eyes glazed over. It was like he was on autopilot as he started walking forward. I screamed for him to stop, but I didn't move. I didn't turn around. I kept walking forward like a coward. We never found his body. Never will either. I don't know what it does, but if you see it, you're never seen again. All we found was his dog tag from the army and his wedding ring hanging on a branch at the top of a tree branch. She finished her tale and walked to the cooler, grabbed herself a bottle of Jameson and drank it straight. So why doesn't everyone know about this? I asked her. She shrugged. Better than us, she callously remarked. What the hell do you mean? I asked her in anger. Look, it needs people for whatever reason. If it doesn't find people out there, what's going to happen? It'll come here then to the suburbs. They'll be everywhere. Sure, it sucks. Some civilians will die, but it's better hand seeing what happens when they lose their supply. When she told me this, I was angry, but I couldn't argue. The second time I saw it was even scarier. A young man fell into a ditch and couldn't get out, so we had to go help him. As we walked to the location, I saw one in my peripheral, but it was in the direction we needed to go. Now what do we do? I asked Jane in a panic. I didn't want to get near that thing. We walk. It's okay to get close, just don't look. She warns me. We walk. Hey, can you help me? It asks in a childish voice. I look at the ground and I'll be tempted to peek. Come on, guys, really. I'm hungry. Help me, it begs. It's only 20 feet away now. I keep walking close. Peter, come on, help. To Jane. Someone help me. It whined. As I pass it, I feel cold. Like I just opened up my freezer. It has a smell to it, like dirty pond water, and it felt bad. Like a ball of anxiety you feel when your plane takes off. or the rush you get when you go down the hill of a roller coaster. My subconscious knows this thing should not be. My body gets covered in goosebumps as I watch my feet crunch. Fall leaves. But the goosebumps are not from the cold. We pass it, and it cried, "Come on, where are you going? I want to go home." It pleads. Eventually it stops asking us to help it. Maybe it got too far away and we couldn't hear it. Maybe it gave up because we knew it won't crack. I don't know. I don't really understand this thing, or maybe things, much at all. I have many more stories of these things, but this isn't story time. Maybe I'll post some other times if they don't bust my ass for posting this. I'm at a public library, hoping they can't trace this back to me. Jane won't snitch. I trust her. In the 6 months I've worked here, 100 people went missing without a trace. 100. The cops pay us off to say it was an accident or animal or drowning. And that's only the area I survey. I can't imagine how many statewide, countrywide, worldwide, at least if an animal eats you, it'll leave bones as evidence. This thing got 100 people. I can't stand by and let this keep happening. I won't be complicit in people going missing like this. So please, especially around the Adirondacks, if a girl in the woods is alone and needs help or wants to talk to you, don't look until it gives you a name. I don't know what happens when it gets you. I never want to find out. And I never want you to find out either. Stay safe and take care of each other, please. Peter. My name is Mark. My wife and I just got divorced. It got really ugly and she ended up getting almost everything. After all was said and done, I just wanted to get away for a while. Thankfully, a buddy of mine owned a cabin upstate that he never used, and he was kind enough to give me the keys to stay there for a while. The drive to the cabin was peaceful, long stretches of forest with rural towns dotting the road. The view from the cabin was spectacular. It sat atop a hill overlooking a valley of pine forests cut in half by a wide river. The cabin was a decent-sized 2-bedroom log house. The decorations and furniture really gave off that rustic feel you'd expect from an isolated cabin. The drive from the city took around 6 hours, and the sun had just begun to set when I arrived. I was exhausted, so off to bed I went, planning on enjoying the beauty of the sun rising over the hills in the morning. I lay in bed and quickly drifted off. The change of scenery alone had helped me relax more than I had in weeks. To knock, knock, knock. I started awake to pounding on the front door of the cabin. I checked the time and it was 11. The nearest town was a good 10-mile drive away, and there wasn't another house in sight for miles. Who the hell would be out here this late? I thought to myself. I slowly crept over to the window to look out at whoever was on the porch knocking. I could feel my heart racing. I heard it pounding in my ears. I cracked the blinds open, just enough to see that there was a park ranger standing at the door. Slightly relieved, I shouted through the window, "Can I help you?" "Yeah, I noticed your car," the ranger replied. "You didn't sign in." "Back in town," he said. "I didn't know I had to." "This is my friend's cabin," I responded. I was beyond confused. How did he just happen to notice my car? You can see the house from the main road, thanks to all the pines. And if my friend owns this place, why would a park ranger be up here asking me to sign in? This is federal land. I've never ventured out this far from the city, so what do I know? I told myself. The ranger's footsteps across the wooden floor cut through the stillness of the night. He leaned down to peer in the window, taking out his flashlight and flicking it on as he approached. I backed off from the window. I'm just being paranoid. I told myself, all the stress from the divorce must be messing with me. He's just making sure I'm safe. I tried reassuring myself, but a part of me wouldn't let go of the feeling that something wasn't right. "Why don't you come outside and I'll take down your information?" The ranger said, shining his flashlight in the window to no avail as the blinds completely obscured his view. How about I come to town tomorrow? I had a long drive and really just want to get back to bed. I replied, maybe he's a ranger, maybe he's a serial killer, and I'm not taking any chances, even if I am just being paranoid. We're going to need your information tonight, just in case something were to happen to you, he said before letting out a soft chuckle. A lot of people go missing around these parts. That's why everyone has to check in. I understand, sir. But I really would rather do it in the morning. I replied, well, I can't force you. I'll tell them to be expecting you down at the station then. He sounded annoyed, but I heard his footsteps grow faint before hearing a car door shut. The engine fired up and then quickly faded away. I walked back to the window to be sure that he was gone. I looked out the window and saw the silhouette of a person standing just outside the reach of the porch light. I stumbled backward. I knew he wasn't a ranger, I thought, holding back a scream, not wanting to alert him. I walked back out the window and he was standing at the window trying to look in. I startled again and fell backward to the floor. He started knocking on the window. Now my heart was really racing. It was all I could hear. My hands became sweaty and I got goosebumps across my entire body. There was a long silence that fell over the cabin. After a few minutes, against my better judgments, I crept back to the window. I peered outside and the sucker was still standing there. But he wasn't wearing a park ranger uniform. He was just wearing jeans and a jacket. That's when I noticed he didn't have a face, just smooth skin where his eyes and mouth should be. I didn't know what to think at this point. His hand slid up the sides of his head and then slowly turned its blank face to look directly at where I was standing behind the blinds. It grabbed the back of its head and a horrible tearing sound rang out as it quickly ripped its face off. Underneath was a massive ball of worm. They began falling to the floor. The body stood there for a moment, then started pounding against the glass. I ran to the bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Tears started running down my face when I heard the window smash. I heard the glass crunch underneath its feet, followed by the sounds of footsteps walking throughout the house. Suddenly, the house fell silent. Then a soft tapping on the bathroom door. A distorted voice said, "Why didn't you come outside? And I'll take down your information." I sat bolt upright in the bathtub, holding back my cries and screams, hoping this was all just a nightmare. Then I heard it again. "Why don't you come outside and I'll take down your information?" There was a long pause before a loud pounding sound rang out, and the door flew off its hinges. I screamed as a bright light hit my face. It was sunlight, and these were sheriffs. One of the officers looked at me and backed out of the room, gagging. I got down, and the tub was full of worms. My body was covered in bruises and cuts, and divots in my skin from where the worms had started eating my flesh. I jumped out of the tub as fast as I could, falling onto the floor sobbing. The sheriff helped me up, wrapped a towel around me, and rushed me out of the house. They took me to the hospital, and after the doctors examined me, I asked the deputy accompanying me what had happened. "Your friend called us," he said. "You hadn't heard from you in a few days, so we went to do a wellness check on you. Well, when we got there, we saw the busted window and knew something was up, so we busted in. And the worms." I asked him. "Don't know. Most guess is it's some ritual whoever has been kidnapping people was doing. You're lucky. Every victim we have found has been dead and nothing but bones, even after being gone only a week. I don't know whether to tell him what happened or not. I wasn't even sure if what I saw was real. No way he'd believe me. Maybe I was really kidnapped. Maybe I was drugged. I don't know. Well, I must get back up there. Small force. We need all hands on deck and I've got dinner waiting back home," he said as a worm fell out of his mouth onto the bright white hospital floor. My eyes widened as he started laughing. "You take care now? Don't worry. Well, call if we need you. A lot of people go missing around these parts. I would forget you, Mark. I was released from the hospital and went home not long after he left. After a few weeks, the wounds had mostly healed. The deeper ones will probably leave scars. I called the sheriff's department where it happened yesterday, and they told me they didn't have any leads on my case. I've tried just forgetting that the whole thing happened, but I keep having nightmares about being eaten by worms. Maybe sharing my story here will help get rid of the nightmares. I lived in Tempe, Arizona for about 9 months back in I then moved to Tucson for several months after that and lived with my great aunt, who is now in her 70s. She's a very rational, logical person, and while she's not opposed to the existence of otherworldly things, that's not usually where her mind gravitates towards when explaining things. I've asked her to tell me this story a couple of times over the years. I've since moved away and don't speak to her as much, but I'll try to recount it as best I can remember. I think this occurred about 15 years ago, but I can't quite remember the year. She said she had attended a concert near Scottsdale with a friend who lived there and was driving back to Tucson, so it's fairly late. She was on I-10 and was the only vehicle on the highway. The stretch of road she was on was about halfway to Tucson. Even now, the drive has stretches of desolate area, and I can only imagine how much more there was those years ago. Suddenly, in the lane next to her, there were 3 black cars. No license plates on any of them. They came from behind her, seemingly out of nowhere. The lights were on inside of one of the cars, and when she looked in, there was no one driving, but there was a man in one of the back passenger seats who seemed to be writing in a notebook. She only caught a glimpse as the 3 cars then sped up and got in front of her, and she swears she saw them drive up a ramp and into the back of an 18-wheeler that had appeared on the highway up ahead. This is also remarkably strange, given how well flat it is out there. It's not like you're driving around bends and coming up or down in climbs. It's flat. You can see for miles and miles. She still doesn't know where that big truck came from or how she didn't see it in front of her. She recalled that the 18-wheeler then steered off the right side of the highway off into the desert, and about a minute later the lights from the truck went out and she could no longer see it. I'm sure I'm forgetting certain details of the story. I wish I remembered more clearly or wrote down what she told me. By the way, I've always found this such a fascinating little tale, and the way my little old auntie tells it is so amusing that she speaks of it most nonchalantly. I asked her what she thought, and she said likely the government or some corporation testing self-driving cars, which certainly seems plausible. At no point in time did she feel threatened or in danger. It was just an odd midnight drive in the desert. Mine was when I went scouting for hunting about 6-7 years ago in the middle of nowhere in Nevada early summer, about 30 miles north of Cave Lake. For those of you familiar with it, you'll know it's as desolate as it gets. I parked my truck and started hiking up the mountain, a 5-mile trek, thinking I was completely alone. It took me a good part of the day to find what I thought was a good spot to set up camp and start scouting. After setting up camp, I hiked another 20 minutes to the top of a canyon and spent about 3 hours glassing. I only saw a couple of deer, but was satisfied for the day, so I headed back to camp for the night. After dinner, I went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling. I lay there awake for a good hour before I started hearing a ton of rustling around me. Thinking it might be a mountain lion, I grabbed my handgun and flashlight, sat up and scanned around, but saw nothing. I turned my light off, now on high alert and on edge. About 5 minutes later, I heard the noises again, but this time they were hurried, like something was running away from me. I turned the light back on, scanned around again, and still saw nothing. I stayed awake for about another hour, but the noises stopped, and I never did fall back asleep, that uneasy feeling of being watched lingering. My phone alarm went off at 4:30. I got ready to head back out to where I had been scouting the night before to see anything at first light. As I walked out of camp, I scanned around with my light to see if I could find any tracks from the noises I heard during the night, but saw nothing. I continued to my spot, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I played it off, finished the morning scouting, and as it started to get warm, I decided to head back to camp, pack up, and go to my next spot. About 50 yards from my camp, I was looking on the ground for tracks again and saw fresh boot prints that weren't mine. Now on high alert, I decided just to go back to the truck. As I packed up and started to hike down, I saw the same boot prints around my camp leading all the way back to the truck, following the same trail I had taken going up. About halfway down, I stopped to rest my knees, sitting at the edge of some aspens, drinking water and eating jerky. Looking back up the mountain I had just ascended, a glint of light caught my eye. I picked up my binoculars and saw a man with a rifle pointed right at me. Hunting season was still about 3 months away. I freaked out, only having my handgun. It was a good 500 yards away. I waved my hand to show I'd seen him. As soon as I got my pack on, he fired a shot in my direction. I started running as fast as I could down the mountain, running and running until I saw the truck. What seemed like hours later, I got in and drove straight to town as fast as I could on backcountry dirt roads. I finally got to town and went straight to the sheriff's office, telling them my story and filing a report. They told me this had happened before in the same area, and they had no idea who it was. I'd never been so freaked out in my life. No, I don't go scouting or hunting without someone with me, and I'll never go back to that place. 2 or 3 in Baghdad. A unit came in May, right after the initial push. We took over a compound that looked like an Iraqi base. Anyway, we're setting up sleeping quarters, and my unit takes over the old medical building. I was in Afghanistan in 2010 for the push on Marja. USMC infantry was in a mobile unit called Cat Platoon, which means we spent nearly every night outside the wire with our own cordons and therefore had to stand watch at night up in the turrets. I had the midnight to 4 a.m. shift every night. The Taliban knew that we didn't really do a lot of patrolling at night unless we were on a specific mission, so that was when they would go to all of the locals who had helped us and pay them a visit. Summing up in the turret, I often got to listen to the sounds of the Taliban torturing a guy we had talked to a day prior a few blocks away without being able to do anything about it. It happened on a regular basis. That and the sounds of locals getting freaky with their livestock. Not an exaggeration. One day, your uncle was walking down along the road just for a morning and he noticed a guy farther behind him. Nothing too unusual. He kept hearing a clicking noise. It started out as click, click, click. He turned around and the only thing behind him was the man. So he shook it off. And pretty soon he starts to hear the clicking noises again, but faster. Click, click, click. He whips around and the only thing behind him is the man just standing there. Somebody yells out asking if the man heard the noise. The man shakes his head. So he shrugs it off and keeps on walking. He'd been walking for a while and he started hearing the click noise super fast now. And it got louder and louder. Click, click. He spins around to see the man right behind him and he asked again if he heard the noise and why he was right behind him. And all the man did was smile super creepily and laugh and laugh. Then the man looked down and so did your uncle. That's when he noticed that this man didn't have feet. He had hose. So he got out of the car and ran back to the town and refused to go back for his car alone. So the next morning they went back and there we tracks, leaving his car into the field. He was super creeped out. I don't remember exactly what the goat man actually did to people. My grandma just told me those 2 stories of the encounters and it creeped me out enough. I saw something in the road that has changed me. I want to know if anyone has experienced something similar or knows what I saw. It was December 2022 and I was Christmas shopping with a friend of mine. I live in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It took up most of the day, so we had quite the load. It was dark by now, so we figured not much else to do, but we might as well power through wrapping everything. By the time we finished, it was a bit after 1 a.m., and we were out of cigarettes, so we left my place to a gas station. had done all the driving during our shopping because she doesn't handle busy traffic very well. So she offered to drive a bit of a night owl, so late night drives aren't out of the ordinary, and the road I live on is a long one. It is not isolated or in a rural area, but there are wooded areas and a train track close to my place. The neighborhood has quite a lot of apartment buildings and houses. The point is that I take a busy road daily, especially at night. So, as we leave the gas station, we are coming up to the intersection with a stop sign that we need to turn left on to get to my place. My uncle turned and booked it back to his car, the whole time hearing the clicks behind him getting closer and closer. When he got to his car, he got in and had to drive past the man to go back home. The goat man just smiled at him as he drove past. Another story, as shorter. This one is about your grandfather when he was young. Your grandfather was driving down the road at night and suddenly sees a man walking along the road, hitchhiking. For some reason, he felt the need to give the guy a ride. I mean, it's dark and in the middle of nowhere, so he pulls over and lets the man get in the car. Everything was normal. Then we're talking about where he was going and such. Then he heard a tapping, which he assumed was the guy tapping his foot. Nothing abnormal, but he kept tapping his foot and it started to get super annoying. So he asked him to stop and he apologized and stopped for a while, but started up again. Then the guy asks to be dropped off down a dirt road not too far from this little town, near Grandpa's house. So he said, sure, and took him to the dirt road. But he didn't get asked to be dropped off at any house, which confused my grandpa. So he asked if he was sure he didn't want him to drop him off closer, and he said no. So my grandpa put in park and that the man opened the door a little, and my grandpa offered him a flashlight and turned it on facing the ground so he doesn't blind the guy, and grandpa looked down and saw he had hooves for feet. I was in the passenger side playing Pokemon Go when my friend said that person must be crazy to be jogging out. I looked up to see that they are approaching the intersection and someone is jogging across it. I laughed in agreement, but I was in awe and blurted out, wow, dude is fast and really tall. Why is he running so weird? I didn't think much about it, but as we got closer, I realized he was running hunched and leaning forward with his arms outstretched behind, like that run they do in Naruto. His arms were long past the knee, with giant outstretched hands and long fingers. He was skinny and, like sickly skinny. The closer we got, the more wrong everything looked and felt. His movements were so weird, like twitchy, but so fluid for the speed at which he was going. There were street lights all along the intersection and roads, but it was so weird because it seemed unusually dark out as we came to the stop sign. Under the street light, he had just crossed and came to a stop right before the edge of where the light reached, about 15 yards out, if that. That was when I looked at the dash clock and it all hit me at once. It was the middle of winter at 1:30 a.m., cold as hell out, and someone was jogging. I realized this guy wasn't a guy. This thing was standing with its back towards us, hunched forward with arms stretched behind with those long outstretched claws. It was the most intimidating stance I've ever seen. It was easily over 7 feet tall and completely black. Its head was shaped like a teardrop. At this point, we had been sitting at the stop sign staring at it for 10 seconds when it did the fastest 80 I have ever seen and was coming straight at us. I've never before had intense fear and panic crash onto me, pure terror. It felt so heavy and my whole being screamed, "Danger, you're in danger." I yelled, "Go, go, go." The car screeched as we took off and my phone flew out of my hand. I looked behind us and sank deeper into a state of terror. This thing was not just keeping up, it was gaining on us. I yelled "Florid," it's right behind us at 60 miles per hour. We started to lose it. I scrambled for my phone to call 911. The car came to a stop and I immediately turned to my friend. She was staring forward wide-eyed, repeating, "I need to see it, I need to see it." I was so panicked that I instinctively turned her towards me and said, "You're not crazy. I saw it too." "You're not crazy. I saw it too. I saw it too. It's real. We need to go before it gets us." She snapped out of it and floored it. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and stopped. It was like I finally got a grip back on myself, almost as if it were a result of the distance between us and that thing. My friend yelled, "What are you doing?" "Call the cops." My response was, "They'll never believe us." I used to listen to a podcast. I remembered the host's words about how when people see things, sometimes he wishes they'd turn around to verify what they saw. I told her, "Don't pull up to my place. It could still be behind us." Floor it to the end of the road. "We're going to switch as fast as we can. I'm going to drive and put my phone against the windshield to record, and you're going to use your phone to record. Then we can have more proof for the police to back up what just happened." She panicked and said no over and over, but she gunned it and drove past my place. We got to the end of the road, switched, and I gunned it toward the direction of the thing. Nothing. This all happened in minutes, and the speed at which we were going, well, we should have met. As we started to approach where we had first seen it, I don't know how to explain it, but I started to feel that fear again. I realized when we lost sight of it that it must have turned around and gone back in the other direction, further down the road, where we first saw it. The speed limit is 25, and I slowed down to 15 when that fear started weighing me down. Then I couldn't believe what happened. It was like a movie. A big group of deer came running from the direction we were headed. They were literally running in the middle of the road and next to the car, bumping into each other. There had to be over 10 of them, buck and doe, in the middle of their run toward the car. It was far less dangerous than what they were running from. I had never seen deer run that fast or so tightly together in such a number. I had to come to a complete stop and wait for them to pass by before I continued driving. My friend commented, "It must be in that direction. Something must have terrified those deer to run towards us like that. It's gotta be that thing we saw." I was thinking the same thing and started to feel fear again. I continued down the stretch of road, nothing. We couldn't find it. I drove till 6 o'clock, too scared to go home without proof to give to the police to look for it. I convinced myself I'd be safe if I knew the police were driving around my area looking for it, scared that it might follow me home if it was still light out. Since that night, I can be in my living room playing a game and feel that same primal fear and panic wash over me. It's not every day, just a couple of times a week. It must be close, and that's why I'm feeling this state of terror. I've had it where I'm gaming, laughing with friends, and that terror crashes into me like that thing is close and is watching me. I know I'm not in a constant state of paranoia. That's why I feel fear. I'll be good enjoying my night with friends or something completely out of mind, and boom, the terror starts to be more frequent and intense. As a smoker at night I smoke, and everything will feel fine. I feel safe. Other times I feel watched and unsafe, like my body is screaming, "You're in danger." The thing I saw on the road that night was black. The thing I've seen after is like white, with almost glowing white eyes and sharp, exposed teeth, but the same tall, thin body and teardrop-shaped head. I know this all sounds crazy. What do you think it was? For the past couple of years, I've had a large, all-white or very light gray wolf that seems to be following me. It mostly shows up around 3 a.m., often when I'm outside. I used to leave for work around 3:15 a.m., and it would almost always be standing in the driveway between the house and my car. It both frightens me extremely, but also doesn't seem to want to harm me. It stands almost in a defensive position, but does not growl at me. Its eyes are a yellowish amber color. I have no clue what this wolf could be or why it would be following me. It's followed me through moving to 3 different states, KY to VT to Florida. I have no reason to think it's a protector type being and no knowledge of a white wolf being culturally significant. They're mostly Irish, Scottish, and French. My grandma likes to claim we're Native American, but I did a DNA test and there was zero Native American DNA in it. I live in Central Texas, San Antonio to be exact. This whole incident happened in the span of maybe 30 to 45 seconds, maybe a minute, but it felt pretty quick and surreal. I was driving on a short stretch of elevated highway, Boysback Parkway if you know the city, traveling northbound between 281 and cutting over to... I was passing the airport just past Thousand Oaks where the highway straightens out for a few miles until it slopes to ground level. It was raining and there are not many streetlights on this part of the highway. I was traveling 60 or 65 miles per hour. My car is a little sedan, so I had a low view of the road. I was the only one on the highway in either direction, aside from a pair of headlights. Several miles behind me in the distance ahead, maybe a half mile or so, I saw what looked like a man-human outline running or jogging on the right-hand shoulder of the road. Aside from it being nearly 1 a.m. and on an elevated stretch of road, I didn't think it too odd. There are lots of drunks in my city and strange things have happened. Nonetheless, I moved from the right lane to the left, just in case. As I approached, I became aware that this silhouette was not getting taller as you would expect as your perception shifts. Instead, it stayed the same height. My estimate may be 3 or 4 feet tall based on the fact its head came to about the same height as the hood of my car. I slowed down to about 50-55 miles per hour and stared at the back of this thing trying to make out details through my rain-soaked windshield. As soon as I got close enough for this thing to be fully in my headlights, it dropped down to all fours as if it was trying to mimic an animal. I know this was not any animal I've seen. Its size was that of a medium-sized coyote, but it was running distinctly like a person attempting to run like an animal. Its hindquarters were raised up in the air, and I could clearly make out buttocks and legs kicked out sideways. If you've ever seen documentaries about feral children, I'll give you an idea of the gait that I am attempting to describe. The only thing is that no human I've seen could run on all fours at the speed this thing was going. The creature was entirely naked and oily, black and smooth. The rain glistened off its skin with a shine like wet black marble or obsidian. I could make out muscle tone and everything as this thing clipped along as it dropped to 2 legs. It lost some speed, either intentionally or just from the change in gait. It was running about the same pace as a person could sprint. I passed this thing and it looked over its left shoulder towards me. Its face was flat, with a flat, wide nose. It had big eyes. I could see the whites and dilated dark pupils. There was no eye shine, which I think is unusual, just those eyes against the black of its skin, though it never looked directly in my headlight beams, so that may be inconsequential. It opened its mouth at one point as it was looking at me as it passed. Its teeth were flat and white like humans, but with larger and prominent canines. It had hands and feet like a person. I couldn't make out any genitalia, but it was distinctly male in its general appearance. It had what best be described as a swimmer's build. Its body was proportionate to that of any other human. That just scaled down, no crazy long limbs or anything like that. I did fumble with my phone with the intent to try and take a photo, but to be honest, I was so enamored, excited, and trying to take in as much detail as possible while driving on a dark, rainy road. I also didn't think a photo would show much because dark rain in the glass of my car windows, but now I'm seriously thinking of getting a dash cam. I hope that car ways behind me saw this thing. It was pretty obvious. I hope I've provided enough detail for an accurate report. I have no idea what I just saw, but I'm glad I saw it. It didn't seem malicious. It looked scared, like it was not happy to be up there and just wanted to get off the highway. I got the very distinct impression that the only reason it dropped to all fours was in an attempt to mimic an animal and draw less attention to itself. He didn't have far to go to the exit, but there was a well-lit gas station at the intersection there. Aside from a few apartment buildings and scattered industrial areas, the only other stuff along this stretch is a small amusement park and the airport. There is an old abandoned concrete plant in the area, next to the highway. Again, if you're local to the area, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That was my first thought as to where it could have come from. We're heading away from this though, and towards a populated area, so it doesn't make much sense. I'm still just floored that I saw this thing. I'm totally open to providing more details, but I believe this to be pretty concise. This is a story that happened to me 18 years ago when I was 7 years old. I lived on a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Both my parents worked in the mornings, and the school year had just ended, so I was home alone. From the kitchen window, I saw something strange in the trees, a creature of sorts. Two things I know. One, this wasn't a little kid's hallucination. Two, I know what it looked like. This creature was about the size of a smart car and sitting about 15 feet up in the tree and had proportions similar to a gargoyle, both in shape and posture. You know how gargoyles sit, hunched over with their back legs wider and their front arms and legs close together or touching, minus the wings? No skin was shown. The creature had short, bear-like fur, mixed with owl-like feathers. The head was massive, with the shape of a bear head and possibly a large beak. I don't know many features of the face because I was so fixated on the eyes of this beast. They were huge eyes the size of basketballs, and the odd thing was that they were blurry, looking like a droopy oil painting. It was an early summer morning, early enough to still be cool, but late enough to be clearly lit everywhere. I saw the creature out the kitchen window, ran out onto the front porch, got a better look at it. I wasn't about to go and check it out just yet and was about 50 yards out, so I went in to grab my father's binoculars. When I got back to the front porch, the creature was gone, nowhere to be seen. So me, being a brave 7-year-old boy, went out to inspect the area. I saw it upon arrival. I saw nothing, no broken branches or marking or anything. The one thing I remember about the area that was different was that it was dead silent in a forest normally bursting with noise, and there was not a single thing to be heard. And I mean that forest where I used to live was super loud too, with all sorts of animals making sounds at all times of the day. Super weird. Anywho, I've never heard of any sort of cryptid that matches what I saw that day. And for 18 years I've been insanely curious if anyone could lead me in the right direction of what sort of folklore, creature, and cryptid thing I saw that day. Please let me know. Or possibly let me know of a better subreddit to post this in. Please and thank you. I've been mulling this over in my head for a little while now, and I honestly forgot that Reddit has a community like this, since I really don't come on here too often, but I figured I'd post my experience and see if anyone had experienced similar thing. So this happened last year. My aunt likes to travel a lot now that she's retired, and she'll ask me to take her to the airport. She lives about an hour outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a place that's pretty rural. She doesn't like traveling out of Fiel and will instead go to EDUR Newark Liberty International Airport for those not familiar with the code or area. So last year she decided to go to South and Central America for a month and asked me to come to her house to drive her since she didn't trust my brother to actually show up when he said he would. I met her at her place the night before, went to bed for a few hours, and then we left in her car at 1 a.m. so she could get to the airport in time. We decided to take her car because it's a mid-sized Suffy. We had held her luggage better than my sedan did. I guess we had been on the road for about 20 minutes. I'm not entirely sure because my perception of the passage of time isn't amazing, but we had to drive through a lot of small little old villages, not sure what else to call them. They were basically clumps of 10 houses in a small area. Their homes are all super close to the road, like basically right on top of it, which helps note them as being a lot older. And none of the lights were on, not even candle lamps in the windows. And if you're from Pennsylvania, you know what I'm talking about with those lamps. They're everywhere. The area had a lot of woods. It was overall just very creepy and very foggy out. We were driving along and all of a sudden we came up on something. It was facing toward a telephone pole off to the right of the car. The pole was just in front of a garage or a small barn structure. All I could see was the back of its head, completely white, with no hair on its hands and forearms, which were also totally white. It looked like it was wearing a dark shirt or something similar, but it was facing away from us, leaning into the telephone pole, with its arms up against the pole and its head against its arms, or at least a stance similar to that. The worst feeling I've ever felt rose up in my chest when I saw it. I felt my heart almost stop and drop into my stomach. I felt sick and terrified. All I knew was that, whatever it was, I didn't want it to turn around no matter what. I knew it couldn't be allowed to turn around or I would regret it. I've seen a lot of really weird things in my life and felt a lot of really weird sensations. I've always been super sensitive to the energy in homes and have straight up seen ghosts in my parents' home, one of which I am very wary of, while the other comforts me, but that's a different story for another time. But this was actually terrifying. I cannot explain the immense feeling of dread and horror I experienced in that moment to you. You can only understand if you've experienced it yourself. We passed by it so quickly and it was so late that I thought I must have imagined it, but that feeling stuck with me. We didn't say anything to my aunt. I thought she didn't see it either, but about 10 seconds after we went past it, she says, "Did you?" And then a long pause. "Did you see that thing?" We talked about it. She described to me exactly what I saw, and I knew right then and there that I was going to be terrified to drive back to her home to switch cars at 4 or 5 a.m. when I got back to her place from the airport by myself. All I could think is that I didn't want that thing to be there because I would hit it if it came into the road and I would stop to check. If I did, it wasn't going to get to me. Luckily, it wasn't there. When I drove past the same area again on the way to her home, and believe me, I was hyper aware the entire way there. I was even terrified to walk from her front door to my car. I ran and locked myself in as soon as I sat down and shut the car door. The next time I drove her to the airport, I looked for it, but it wasn't there. I haven't seen it since. I've only told a couple of friends about it, and one of them and her best friend saw something similar peeking at them around the backside of her house when they were sitting in her car one night. She also lives in rural Pennsylvania, 19 miles from me, a 40-minute drive, and I'm 22-ish miles outside of Philly, roughly a 40-minute drive. She also lives out in the woods. Have any of you ever experienced something like this? I saw a video once online of something that just had a white head and white long legs walking around and didn't look like that. This thing was tall with distinct arms and legs. It had no hair whatsoever on its body. I don't know if it had facial features, because it was facing towards the pole, almost like it was counting for hide and go seek with its arms up. It might have been hugging onto the pole. It wore something black, and I experienced the worst and most deeply jolting fear in its presence. I was only near to it for a few seconds. It was late October when the call of the Alaskan wilderness beckoned me once more. The days were growing shorter, the nights colder, but this was the time the forests felt most alive. I packed my gear, checked my rifle, and left my small cabin near Kenai for a week-long hunting trip deep in the heart of the Alaskan interior. A place where nature was raw, beautiful, and terrifying. My name is Jack, a seasoned hunter with more stories than scars and enough survival instincts to guide me through the most unforgiving terrains. But there was one experience, one haunting moment that shattered every rule I believed in. On the second night, I set up camp beneath a canopy of pine and spruce. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing against the towering trees. The wind whispered secrets as it wove through the branches. But there was another sound beneath it, almost imperceptible, a soft rustling as if something heavy and deliberate was moving in the distance. I paused, straining to listen. The forest fell silent. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, but I shrugged it off as a wandering elk or bear, common enough in these woods. Still, I kept my rifle close as I settled into my sleeping bag, the unease gnawing at the edge of my mind. Sleep came fitfully. The deep silence of the woods pressed against my ears, broken only by the occasional crack of a branch or distant hoot of an owl. At some point in the night, I woke up abruptly. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting a faint glow over the camp. But beyond the flickering light, I saw them. Two eyes, yellow and luminescent, staring at me from the dark. I froze, my heart thundering in my chest. The eyes didn't move. They didn't blink. And they sat too high off the ground to belong to any animal I knew. I reached slowly for my rifle, the metallic click of the safety sounding like a gunshot in the stillness, and then the eyes vanished. At dawn, I ventured out to investigate. The morning light filtered through the trees, painting the forest in a palette of golds and greens. But my blood ran cold when I found tracks leading up to the edge of my camp. They were large, canine-like, but too wide and deep to belong to any wolf or dog. They circled my camp, then disappeared into the thicket without a trace. I had hunted wolves before. I knew their tracks, their behavior. This was different. This was calculated, almost human in its precision. The following night, I didn't light a fire. I sat in the dark, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the woods for any sign of movement. The hours dragged on, each minute ticking by. And then just as the clock neared midnight, I heard it, a low growl, deep and resonant, coming from just beyond the tree line. I aimed my flashlight into the woods, the beam slicing through the dark. For a moment there was nothing, and then it stepped into the light. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body covered in matted dark fur. The face was elongated, lupine but twisted with an intelligence that defied reason. Its eyes, those same yellow eyes, locked onto mine, and a snarl curled its lips to reveal rows of jagged teeth. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a fear so primal it seemed to sap the strength from my limbs. The creature took a step forward, its movements graceful, almost deliberate. I raised my rifle, my finger trembling on the trigger. The shot echoed through the forest, sharp and deafening. The creature flinched but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a gravelly howl that reverberated through my bones and retreated into the shadows as swiftly as it had appeared. By the time morning came, I was already packing up my camp. I knew I couldn't stay. Not after that. As I retraced my steps back toward civilization, I felt eyes on me, the sensation of being watched, tracked. I moved quickly, refusing to look back, each rustle and snap of a branch igniting fresh waves of panic. When I finally reached my cabin, I locked the doors and windows, the weight of what I'd seen pressing heavily on my chest. I reported the encounter to the local authorities, but they dismissed it as a bear sighting, their skepticism evident in their forced smiles and polite nods. But I knew better. The creature wasn't a bear, nor was it any known animal. It was something older, something that didn't belong in the realm of the natural. And though I never saw it again, I could never shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching and waiting in the deep woods of Alaska. This story takes place in the backcountry of the area I grew up in. Be warned, some of this might be too frightening for some readers. Reader discretion is advised. Back in 2019, there was a big uproar about unknown creatures roaming the forest like Bigfoot and skinwalkers, but this story isn't about them. This story is about one of the scariest things I've ever heard about, the Wendigo. A few months after my friend Jacob mentioned this uproar, I went to see him since I had been away enlisted in the United States Marines. I got back after being discharged, and one of the first things I did was go and see him. We were having a good old time when he brought up the idea of going out to a little hangout spot. His now ex-girlfriend had taken him to when they wanted to get away for a few hours. I decided, why not? So I grabbed my gun and we went out to this extremely secluded area and started messing around on the old dock that was there. It had been pretty much forgotten by the looks of it, poorly maintained with some boards almost completely rotted through. About 40 minutes into our shenanigans, Jacob brought up the topic of the Wendigo. The name sounded a little scary even for me, curious. I asked him about it. He said that if you went into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would come across the scariest thing you've ever seen, calling his bluff. I told him to prove it, and to this day, I wish I hadn't. We started walking on a little path that led deep into the thick woods close to the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20 minutes and decided we were in a good spot. It's worth noting that it had been raining a lot over the past couple of days, so the ground was completely saturated with water. I turned to Jacob and he dared me to do it. I stood there in complete silence. The rest of the forest was almost silent as well, besides the tall pines swaying in the wind high above our heads. Reluctantly, I slowly started to say it. Wendigo, 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 and nothing happened. I let out a silent sigh of relief. One thing about Jacob and me is that we loved proving each other wrong. In our friendship of 10 years, this was one of the first times I had proven him wrong. We started to talk a little smack when we heard a noise in the distance. My marine reflexes kicked in and I immediately snapped toward the direction of the noise, which was just then turning into noises. I started moving closer to the noises, and shortly after we saw a few coyotes running across the path about 30 feet in front of us. I breathed another sigh of relief, but it didn't last long. I knew something was up, I didn't know what, but I knew it was time for us to leave. As we turned to leave the woods, all of a sudden a tall pine tree started to groan and creak as it began to come down. Noticing this in a moment of pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forward as the tree came crashing down, landing right between us. Jacob let out a cry of terror as the tree landed, and I hopped over it to get to him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum. As I grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him to his feet, he was still terrified and practically crying. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Move, Jacob, move now." I spun him around hard, causing him to fall to his knees. I quickly got him up, and we both started to sprint down the path back the way we came. I didn't dare look back, and meted at Jacob. I was sprinting through the woods when a familiar sound came from behind me. "Jacob, Jacob, come quick." It was the sound of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. He turned and tried to get past me, screaming Olivia the whole time. I stopped him and said, "Jacob, look at me, it's not her. Do you hear me? It's not her." Just then, another pine tree started to buckle. I saw it just in time to tackle Jacob to the ground. As we were nearly crushed, I screamed to Jacob once more. "Go, get out of here, go now." As I was yelling, I pulled my gun out of my waistband and aimed it down the trail from where we came. Jacob made it to the opening of the trail and turned back, noticing I was still aiming my gun. "Bradley, get out of there. Come on, hurry." I turned and started sprinting towards him. As I made it into the clearing about 50 feet, we both saw it, the thing we had summoned the wind to go. It stood about 9 feet tall on its hind legs. There was practically no meat on its bones, with skinny legs and even skinnier arms. Its skin was pale white, almost like a vampire's. But the thing I noticed the most were its eyes, a vibrant blue, almost like lightsaber blue for those who have seen Star Wars. Having had enough fear, I raised my gun and fired at the Wendigo. Jacob, not sticking around to see if I had killed it, turned and ran towards the car. I did the same as he passed me. That was my first experience with the so-called Wendigo, and I pray almost every night that I never have to encounter something that terrifying again. The Hollow, that's what the locals call it. Hollow Creek, where the trees grow so thick and old they choke the sun. The forest here is different than anywhere else. I've worked and I've worked a lot of places. There's something about it, something in the air that makes the hair on your neck stand at attention. The only sound you hear out there is the wind. But even that doesn't feel right. It's like the forest has its own rhythm, a pulse that only the trees and the creatures that dwell within understand. And the creatures, well, they've never been kind. And Luke Callahan, been a forest ranger for most of my life. It's a quiet job. Mostly you patrol the same trails, check for any signs of illegal activity, make sure no one's getting too close to the creek. There's nothing out here but woods, and people tend to forget about the dangers. You get comfortable. You don't think anything can go wrong, not in a place like this. It's just the way things are. But lately things have been changing. People are starting to disappear. Hikers who wander off the trails, hunters who don't come back from their trips, and now a man found dead in the woods. His body was discovered near the creek, throat torn open, but there wasn't any blood, just a ring of dirt where he had fallen. I'd seen my share of animal attacks, but nothing like this, nothing that felt this unnatural. I thought it was a bear at first, maybe a cougar, but after the first few patrols through the area, I started to think there was something more to it, something bigger. The trees are thicker here, more tangled, like the forest itself is hiding something. The locals always talked about the things that walk in the woods, but I never paid much attention. It's always easy to dismiss the old stories until you find yourself staring down the barrel of something you can't explain. I remember the first time I heard it, a low, distant growl like something moving through the brush, just beyond my reach. I had been out on patrol walking along the creek when I heard it. I thought it was a bear at first. They're common around here, but this was different, too deliberate, too close. I froze, listened, but the sound stopped as quickly as it had started. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I was waiting for it to come, waiting for something to break the silence, but it didn't. That's when I first realized I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was out there watching me. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the trees, it was something else, something that was no longer just a story told around campfires. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. I went about my duties, checking the usual spots, but the feeling of being watched never left. The woods felt wrong, like they were closing in on me, and every night the growls would get closer, louder, like something was moving through the trees, just out of sight, waiting for me to make a mistake. Then there came the call: a hunter found dead near the creek. His body was discovered deep in the woods, throat ripped open, but like the first body, there was no blood, just the disturbed dirt. The first body had been an isolated case, a freak accident maybe, but two bodies, that was no accident. Something was hunting, something big, something that knew the land. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew one thing. It was time to stop pretending. The stories weren't just stories anymore. They were real. The next few days dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. There were no more bodies, at least not yet. But the woods felt like a pressure cooker, as if everything was building up to something I couldn't see. The growls were getting louder, closer, and then on the third night after the second body was found, it happened. I was out on patrol again. Same stretch of creek, same dense trees pressing in on me from all sides. I checked my watch at 3 a.m. The fog had rolled in thick as soup, hanging low in the valley. You could barely see a few feet in front of you. I stood still for a moment, listening. The wind was quiet, but there was something else, a low sound like breathing, but not human. I couldn't pinpoint the direction. It was everywhere, coming from all sides. It vibrated in my chest, deep and primal, like something was just on the other side of the fog, watching me, waiting. My hand instinctively reached for the radio on my belt, but I didn't speak. If this was a bear, I didn't want to make it worse, but I had a feeling deep in my gut that this wasn't a bear. It was something else entirely. I pulled the flashlight from my pack and swept the beam across the trees, moving slowly, methodically. The beam. bounced off the wet trunks, but I couldn't see anything. No movements, no eyes reflecting the light. Nothing. Then came the growl again. It was closer this time, a deep sound that made my pulse quicken. I swung the beam of light around, but the moment I did, the growl stopped. Silent. My eyes scanned the area, but all I saw were shadows. Nothing moved. Not a rustle in the underbrush. It was alone, or so I thought. Then I heard it scratching, slow, deliberate, a sharp scrape against metal. It was right behind me, too close to be an animal. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I spun around, the flashlight in hand, but again nothing, just fog and trees. Nothing out of place. But I could feel it. I could feel the weight of it. The presence like a dark cloud hanging over me. I took a step back, scanning the woods again. No movement, no growls. And then I saw it. Two glowing eyes, low to the ground, huge and shining like fireflies in the dark. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The eyes didn't blink. They just stared, and I knew with a cold certainty that this thing wasn't hunting for food. It was hunting for something else, something deeper. The silence stretched out, thick with tension. I was paralyzed, unable to move, unable to take my eyes off those glowing orbs. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. No sound, no rustling, just gone. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something, anything to happen, but nothing did. The fog closed in around me, swallowing the forest whole. I slowly backed away, my hand never leaving the radio, my mind racing. What the hell was that? My body was screaming at me to run and get out of there, but I couldn't not. Yet, not until I knew what I was up against. I reached the truck. The faintest glimmer of safety. As I got inside and started the engine, I looked back at the dark, silent woods. I'd seen it. It was real. The legends of Hollow Creek weren't just stories. Whatever it was, the creature was out there and it was watching me. The next day, the fog had lifted, but the unease in my gut remained. There were no fresh reports, no new bodies, but something was changing in the air. I knew it. The woods felt different, heavier, more oppressive. The kind of silence you get just before a storm. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd glimpsed the night before wasn't done with me. I spent the day at the station trying to keep my focus on the paperwork, but it was hard to concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to those eyes. I could still see them glowing in the fog, watching me. Around midday, I heard the old man's voice, Carl, the cryptid expert, crackling through the static on my radio. He had called in a tip earlier that week, but I hadn't taken it seriously. It wasn't unusual for Carl to call with one of his wild theories. He was old, lived alone in a cabin deep in the woods, and his mind wandered just as much as his body did. He'd been talking about the hounds of Hollow Creek, an ancient story he said had been passed down for generations. The creature was no mere myth, he insisted. It was something that had been born in blood and ritual, something older than the land itself. "Aren't you there?" Carl's voice was rough, like he hadn't had a good night's sleep in weeks. "Yeah, Carl, what's up? You need to come out here. Boy, I found something you're not gonna like." I grabbed my gear without hesitation. If Carl was calling me in, it was serious. I didn't even need to think twice. The forest had been quiet, but I had the feeling that I was about to uncover something that would change everything. Something dark, something that had been buried for a long time. The drive to Carl's cabin was long, winding through narrow dirt roads and thick trees. When I pulled up to the clearing near his cabin, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the usual pine and damp earth. It was something wrong, something like decay. I parked my truck and walked up to the front door, my boots crunching on the gravel. Carl was sitting outside, rocking in his chair. He looked up as I approached, his face pale-eyed with a fear I hadn't seen in him before. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded. "I saw something." "What's going on, Carl?" He motioned for me to sit. "You don't understand. It's not just a creature, it's a curse. A curse bound to this land long before you or I came here." I sat across from him, unsure whether I was ready to hear what he had to say. A curse. Carl's eyes darted to the woods and his voice dropped to a whisper. The settlers, the ones who first claimed this land, they made a deal, a pact with something darker than they could ever have imagined. They summoned it, the hounds, but they couldn't control it, not fully. And now it's hunting the ones who dare enter the hollow. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, the weight of his words sinking in. "So, what is it? What do you want me to do?" Carl stood up, slowly leaning on the porch railing. "I found something old. It might be the key, but we have to act fast." We worked to the edge of the clearing where a large rock lay, half buried in the dirt. Carl knelt down and began to clear away the dirt with his hands. After a few moments, he pulled out a small rusted box. "This," he said, holding it up, "is what I found. The key to the curse. You need to take it to the creek, to the heart of Hollow Creek, and bury it there. That's the only way to end it." I took the box from him, the weight of it heavy in my hand. "And this will stop the creature." Carl nodded gravely. "It'll stop the creature and it will stop the curse, but you'll need to do it before the full moon rises. After that, it'll be too late." I looked at the box, then back at Carl, my mind racing. I didn't understand all of it, but I didn't need to. There was something out there in the woods, something that wasn't going to stop until it had what it wanted, and I was the one it was hunting. The full moon was rising. As I made my way back into the woods, the box clenched tightly in my hand. The shadows stretched long across the forest floor, twisted and distorted by the moon's pale light. The air felt heavier with every step I took, like the land itself was pressing in on me, urging me to turn back. But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't do this now, it would never end. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I couldn't. The last thing I wanted was to involve anyone else in this madness. It was too late for that. Carl had been right. I was being hunted. Whatever this creature was, it had been around a lot longer than me. The forest was still quiet, like everything was waiting for something. Every snap of a twig or rustle in the underbrush had my nerves on edge. I knew it was close. I could feel it. The air crackled with an unspoken promise. Something was watching me, something that was waiting for the right moment to strike. I reached the creek just as the moon broke through the trees, casting an eerie glow over the water. The current was fast, and the sound of it rushing over rocks filled the silence of the forest. I looked around, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched, but all I saw were trees, their branches swaying in the wind, their leaves rustling in the night. The spot I was looking for was just a little further down the bank. It was an area Carl had mentioned in his ramblings, a place where strange things had happened in the past. The ground was soft, the earth rich with moisture. I knelt down and dug into the dirt, my hands working quickly, throwing the soil aside as anticipation built in my chest as I dug deeper. The wind shifted. A low growl not far off rolled through the trees. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. As I stood up, scanning the dark, searching for any sign of movement, my heart pounded in my chest, fear that had been building now rushing to the surface. It was here. The creature was here. And then I saw it. The eyes, at first, they were just faint glimmers in the distance, barely visible, glowing like two tiny embers floating in the darkness. But then they grew, coming closer, moving in my direction. The creature was circling me, watching, waiting for the perfect moment. It grabbed the box, holding it tight, my fingers shaking as I fumbled with the lock. The growl grew louder, vibrating in the pit of my stomach. I had to act fast. I had to finish this. But as I struggled to open the box, the growl turned into something worse. A snore. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned just in time to see the creature emerge from the shadows. It was massive, taller than any man, with the body of a wolf but standing on two legs like a human. Its fur was matted and dark, its face twisted in a grotesque snarl, revealing sharp yellow teeth. Its eyes, those burning eyes, locked onto me, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Though I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen in place, my mind scrambling to process what I was seeing. It was real. It wasn't just a story or a figment of my imagination. This thing, the dog man, was real. The creature took a slow step forward, its claws scraping against the ground. I backed up, my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't dare take my eyes off it. The box was still in my hands, the key to ending this nightmare. But would it be enough? The creature let out a deep, bone-chilling growl, its eyes flashing with hunger. I could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on me, threatening to crush me under its gaze. "Come on," I whispered to myself, forcing the words out. "Come on, damn it." I took a deep breath, willing my shaking hands to steady and finally opened the box. The contents inside gleamed in the moonlight, a small, silver-plated knife, its handle worn and old but still sharp. It was the only thing that could stop this creature, and the only thing that could end the curse that had plagued these woods for generations. I gripped the knife, my fingers tightening around the handle. The dogman growled again, louder this time, its eyes narrowing as it took another step forward. I didn't know how much time I had left. I didn't know if this would work, but I didn't have a choice. The creature's snarl vibrated through the ground beneath my boots. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw something else in them, something almost human, a recognition, a familiarity, like it knew me. I took another step back, my fingers clenched around the silver knife. My thoughts raced, my heart hammered in my chest. I didn't know how to kill it, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't let it get any closer. If I was going to survive this, if I was going to end this nightmare, I had to fight back. The dogman growled again, low, and then it lunged. Its speed was like nothing I'd ever seen. The force of its movement sent a gust of wind through the trees as it rushed at me. Massive claws extended, and it barely had time to react and blow. It was on top of me, its breath hot and putrid against my face. I felt its weight, its strength, as it knocked me to the ground. The knife slipped from my hand, clattering on the rocks. I scrambled to get free. My lungs were heavy with fear. But the creature was faster. It pinned me to the ground with one massive claw on my chest, its face inches from mine. I could see the yellow gleam of its teeth, hear the rasping growl in its throat. Its eyes, those damn eyes, burned with a hunger that made my blood run cold. But I couldn't give up. I couldn't let this thing win. I reached out, my hand groping for the knife, feeling the cold steel of the blade against my fingertips. I grabbed it, my grip shaky, but firm. The creature snarled again, pressing its weight down on me, but I didn't hesitate. I drove the knife into its side, the silver cutting through its flesh like butter. Dogman howled in pain, a terrible bone-chilling scream that echoed through the forest. It recoiled its claw, lifting off my chest, and I saw my chance. I pushed with everything I had rolling out from under it, gasping for air. As I scrambled to my feet, the creature staggered back its side, using a black, viscous substance that smelled worse than death itself. The wrong I had inflicted was already beginning to close, the creature's unnatural regeneration working against me. But it was still wounded, and that was enough. I moved quickly, circling the creature as it turned its glowing eyes, never leaving me. The air between us crackled with tension, a deadly standoff. The dogman wasn't giving up. He was smarter than I had thought, more calculating, and it wasn't about to let me escape. I clenched the knife, waiting for the right moment. The creature lunged again faster than before, but this time I was ready. I ducked low, dodging its claws, and I drove the knife deep into its belly, pushing with everything I had. The dogman screamed again, but this time the sound was different, more desperate, less confident. It staggered back, its hands clutching at the wound. The glow in its eyes flickered, dinning, and for a brief moment I saw something else there, something that looked like fear. I wasn't sure if it was the silver or the will to survive, but something was working. The creature's movements were slowing, its growls were quieter, now weaker. I took another step forward, the knife still gripped tightly in my hand. It was almost over, but then, just as I thought I had it, the dogman twisted its body and swung its massive paw at me with a force I wasn't ready for. It caught me across the chest, sending me sprawling to the ground. The wind knocked out of me. A gasp for air, the pain searing through my body. But I couldn't give up now. The creature was weakening. It was almost finished. Sure, the final effort, I rose to my feet, the knife still in my hand. I charged at the dogman, screaming as I drove the blade into its throat, straight through its skin and muscle into the dark, cursed heart that pulsed beneath the creature's body, convulsed, its eyes flashing one last time before they went dark. The glowing ceased, the curse lifting from its soul. The dogman collapsed to the ground, its massive form twitching as the life drained from it. The forest fell silent. I stood there panting, my body aching from the battle. The knife in my hand was coated in blackened blood, the handle slick and warm with the remnants of the creature's curse. But it was over. The monster was dead. I stepped back, watching as the dogman's body began to disintegrate into the earth. It wasn't a peaceful death, but it was final. The forest was quiet once again, but as I turned to leave, the weight of the night still heavy on my shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had changed. The curse may have lifted from the creature, but the land itself still carried the echoes of what had happened here. The hounds of Hollow Creek had been defeated. For now, the forest was quiet, too quiet. I walked through the trees, the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath my boots being the only sound. But even that felt wrong. The knot had swallowed up the chaos, leaving behind only the remnants of a battle that had cost me more than I'd ever expected to pay. My muscles ached and my chest burned with each breath, but there was no relief, not yet. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch forever. Hollow Creek, the place that had once been home to mystery and fear, now seemed empty. The dogman was gone, the curse was lifted, but something about the stillness felt oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something else to happen. I glanced back once more, half expecting to see the creature's glowing eyes staring back at me from the trees. But there was nothing, just the empty woods and the cold wind that stirred the branches overhead. The creature was dead, the land had been freed, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't finished the job. I could feel the weight of everything, the victims, the lost souls, the silence of the forest that had witnessed centuries of bloodshed. The hounds of Hollow Creek weren't just monsters. They were a manifestation of something darker, a curse, an ancient pact, one woven into the very fabric of this place. And as much as I destroyed the creature, I knew that evil, in some forms, still lingered in the trees. It was in the way the shadows seemed to move, shifting just out of sight, in the way the wind whispered secrets from deep within the forest. The past hadn't been erased, it had only been buried. I stopped in front of the ranger station, its dilapidated structure barely visible through the trees. The door was still hanging ajar, just as I'd left it. The bloodstains on the walls, the remnants of Emily's gear scattered across the floor, remained frozen in time. Her flashlight blinked weakly on the counter, casting an eerie, pulsating light in the otherwise dark room. I didn't know where she was, I didn't know if she was still alive, but as much as I wanted to believe the worst was over, I couldn't bring myself to go in and search. I knew deep down that I had already seen too much. I felt the creature's breath on my neck and I had watched it die. That was enough. But even with the dogmen gone, the forest would never be the same. I wasn't the first to come across its secrets, and I wouldn't be the last. Hollow Creek had been cursed long before I set foot in it, and as much as I wanted to walk away, I knew that this place was tied to me. Now, whether I liked it or not, I was part of its dark history. I turned away from the ranger station, the weight of it heavy on my back. The trains whispered behind me, their voices carried by the wind, as though they were bidding me farewell or warning me not to return. I didn't know if I would ever come back to Hollow Creek. Part of me wanted to forget it all, to leave the woods behind and never think of it again. But as I walked away, I felt the pull of it. The forest would always be a part of me, and though the dogman was dead, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hounds of Hollow Creek would always be there, lurking in the shadows. The forest had changed, but it wasn't finished with me yet. I looked back one last time, a silhouette of the trees standing like silent sentinels in the night. The moonlight bathed the land in a ghostly glow, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw something move in the distance, something tall, dark, and watching. I didn't wait long enough to see what it was. The forest would keep its secrets, and I had my own to carry with me. I walked into the night, the sound of my footsteps fading into the distance, but Hollow Creek, with all its horrors and mysteries, would never truly let me go. The hounds of Hollow Creek had been defeated, but their legacy would endure. The first time I stepped into Bitty Root Forest, I didn't know how much it would change me. My name is Sam Bishop, and I've been a park ranger for nearly a decade. I've seen my fair share of strange things in the woods, freak storms, lost hikers, animal tracks that don't match anything in the guidebook. But what happened here in 22 was different. The deaths of those hikers weren't just tragic accidents. They were something else, something no one wanted to talk about, and I was the one left to clean up the mess. The day I started at Bitterroot was overcast, the kind of sky that makes everything look a little too still. The trees towering over the path like silent sentinels seemed to close in on me. It felt as if the forest itself was watching, waiting. It was supposed to be a temporary fill-in, covering for a colleague who had gone on leave. That colleague never came back. I didn't know the specifics, only that the authorities were quick to call it a series of accidents, a few lost souls caught in the wilderness, as it were. But something in the air told me that the truth was buried under layers of bureaucracy and lies. I remember walking the same paths those hikers had taken. Their bodies, found days apart, had been ripped apart in a way that didn't make sense. The official reports claimed wild animals were to blame. Bears, wolves, maybe even a rogue mountain lion, but I didn't believe that. There were no signs of large animal tracks near the bodies, no claw marks, no evidence of struggle. It was as if the hikers had been picked apart by something smaller, something much more methodical. The cover story was already in place by the time I arrived. A tragic series of accidents, no foul play, no foul creatures. The state authorities were determined to keep the truth buried. But there was one problem. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't forget about the glint of something unnatural I'd seen on the last victim's body, something that hadn't been reported in any of the official statements. A pattern of small, precise cuts along the arms and neck, looking almost surgical in nature. I tried to ask around. The locals who lived on the outskirts of the forest didn't want to talk. I remember one old woman's face turning pale when I mentioned the hiker's deaths. She quickly changed the subject, offering me a glass of water and a forced smile. Now and then that they all knew something that hadn't been passed along in the police reports, something that everyone was too scared to acknowledge. But I had a job to do, and I was going to do it. Every day I hiked deeper into Bitterroot looking for answers. No one seemed willing to give. I spent hours alone, mapping out the locations of the bodies, piecing together small clues, broken branches, disturbed earth, odd stains on the ground. Each time I returned to the ranger station, I felt the weight of the forest closing in around me, the trees, the shadows. They seemed to move of their own accord, as if the land was aware of my every step. And then, one evening, I found something that would change everything. It was late in the day when I stumbled upon it, hidden beneath a canopy of thick undergrowth. I had been following a trail, a hunch really, when the ground shifted beneath my boots. At first, I thought it was just another animal den, some old burrow that time had swallowed up. But as I knelt down and brushed the leaves aside, I saw the faint glint of bone. I froze. The bones were small, but there were so many of them. They were scattered across the earth in a way that didn't look natural. No, this wasn't the result of a predator's feast. Whose bones had been placed deliberately, almost as if someone had arranged them. I reached down and carefully picked one up, my fingers brushing the brittle surface. There was a jawbone and the teeth were sharp, too sharp. I couldn't explain it, but my stomach churned at the sight of it. I didn't want to look closer, but something inside me urged me to keep going. My flashlight flickered on as I examined the area more thoroughly, and that's when I found something that stopped my heart. Among the bones were hundreds, no thousands, of eyeballs. They were scattered across the earth, preserved somehow, each one gleaming in the dim light. Some were still intact, others crushed, but all of them had a sickening, unnatural clarity to them. They stared up at me with a hollow gaze that seemed to pierce my very soul. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a creeping sensation spreading through me. This wasn't a random animal kill. I realized with growing horror, these eyes weren't just remnants of creatures that had met their end here. No, they were sentient, watching me, judging me. I stumbled back, a rush of adrenaline flooding my veins. The breath quickened as I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. What kind of creature would leave this behind? A cryptid? Maybe something born from the deepest, darkest corners of the forest. I wasn't sure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Get a grip, Bishop. I muttered to myself, trying to steady my nerves, but it was useless. The eyes followed my every move, silently observing me as I backed away from the scene. They seemed to beckon me closer, urging me to dive deeper into the mystery. But I wasn't ready for whatever lay ahead, not yet. As I turned to leave, I heard something faint but unmistakable. A whisper, a voice like the wind, carrying a message through the trees. You shouldn't have come. I froze. The voice wasn't in my head, it was real. It was coming from behind me. I turned sharply, my pulse pounding in my ears. The trees swayed in the breeze, but there was no one there. No movements, no sign of anything. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just the wind. But that whisper, it hadn't been the wind, it had come from somewhere. A voice so quiet, yet so clear that it sent a chill down my spine. I scanned the surrounding woods, trying to shake off the feeling that something or someone was watching me. Just your nerves playing tricks, Bishop, I muttered, forcing myself to take a deep breath. I glanced back at the scene with the bones and the eyes, the strange altar-like arrangement, but that seemed even more ominous. I knew I had to report this, but I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet. There was too much unanswered, too much that didn't fit. I took one last look around, my hand hovering over my radio. I was about to call in and let my supervisors know what I'd found when something caught my eye. A shape in the distance, faint but moving too fast for a person, too irregular to be an animal. I followed it instinctively, drawn by some invisible force. My legs carried me toward it through thick brush and up uneven terrain. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe. In the fading light, the air had turned colder, sharper, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I didn't know why, but I had to know what it was. I had to find the source of that voice, that strange presence in the woods. I pushed through a cluster of low-hanging branches and found myself at the edge of a small clearing. My flashlight bounced off something pale in the center. It was a pile of human bones, twisted, knot on, and partially buried in the earth like a forgotten grave. But what stood out the most were the eyes. Hundreds of them, just like before, but these were different, larger, more intact. They were lined up in rows like some sort of grotesque collection, their glassy surfaces gleaming in the faint moonlight. I stepped forward without thinking, my foot landing on something soft beneath the dirt. A shiver ran through me and I pulled my foot back, terrified to look at what I had disturbed. But when I did, my stomach dropped. There, buried just under the surface, was the body of a man. His clothes were shredded and his face was frozen in an expression of horror, his eyes wide open, staring into eternity. His skin had been stripped away in places, revealing muscle and bone. But it was the eyes that haunted me. They weren't just staring, they were still alive, moving, following my every motion. I couldn't breathe. My body felt heavy, like it was being pulled down by some unseen force. The voice from earlier returned, softer now, but unmistakably clear. Leave now. But it was too late. I was already caught in its grip. I turned sharply, my pulse pounding in my ears. The trees swayed in the breeze, but there was no one there, no movement, no sign of anything. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just the wind. But that whisper, it hadn't been the wind. It had come from somewhere. A voice so quiet yet so clear sent a chill down my spine. I scanned the surrounding woods, trying to shake off the feeling that something or someone was watching me. Just your nerves playing tricks, Bishop. I muttered, forcing myself to take a deep breath. I glanced back at the scene with the bones in the eyes and the strange altar-like arrangement. That now seemed even more ominous. I know I had to report this, but I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet. There was too much unanswered, too much that didn't fit. I took one last look around, my hand hovering over my radio. I was about to call in to let my supervisors know what I'd found when something caught my eye. The shape in the distance, faint but moving too fast for a person, too irregular to be an animal. I followed it instinctively, drawn by some invisible force. My legs carried me through thick brush and up uneven terrain. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe. In the fading light, the air had turned colder, sharper, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I didn't know why, but I had to know what it was. I had to find the source of that voice, that strange presence in the woods. I pushed through a cluster of low-hanging branches and found myself at the edge of a small clearing. My flashlight bounced off something pale in the center. It was a pile of human bones, twisted, knot on, and partially buried in the earth like a forgotten grave. But what stood out the most were the eyes. Hundreds of them, just like before, but these were different. Larger, more intact. They were lined up in rows like some sort of grotesque collection, their glassy surfaces gleaming in the faint moonlight. I stepped forward without thinking, my foot landing on something soft beneath the dirt. A shiver ran through me and I pulled my foot back, terrified to look at what I had disturbed, but when I did, my stomach dropped. There, buried just under the surface, was the body of a man. His clothes were shredded and his face was frozen in an expression of horror, his eyes wide open, staring into eternity. His skin had been stripped away in places, revealing muscle and bone. It was the eyes that haunted me. They weren't just staring, they were still alive, moving, following my every motion. I couldn't breathe. My body felt heavy, like it was being pulled down by some unseen force. The voice from earlier returned, softer now, but unmistakably clear. Leave now. It was too late. I was already caught in its grip. The ground beneath me trembled, and for a moment everything went black. I wasn't sure if I had passed out or if the creature had somehow taken my consciousness, but when my senses returned, I found myself still standing in the clearing. The thing was gone. The forest felt different now, warmer and thicker, as if it had swallowed me whole. There was a weight in the air, and a natural stillness that made it feel like the whole world was holding its breath. My chest tightened as I struggled to push myself up. The last thing I remembered was the creature's eyes, those countless eyes that seemed to stretch across the entire forest, watching, waiting, judging. They were all still there, but now they were inside me, lurking in the corners of my mind. Their gaze burned through every thought, every action. I could feel them feel their hunger. I stumbled through the trees, my heart pounding in my throat, but the forest seemed to close in around me. No matter which way I turned, the path ahead remained shrouded in shadows, the trees stretching farther than they should. I was lost. Worse, I was being led deeper into the woods. I could feel it, a pull stronger than any sense of direction. The creature's influence was all-encompassing. "Help anyone," I muttered, but my voice sounded distant, as if it was coming from someone else. My body wasn't mine anymore. It was moving without my consent, like a puppet on invisible strings. And then, through the trees, I saw it again. The altar, the pile of bones, the eyes, hundreds of them. This time, they weren't just scattered, they were ranged in concentric circles staring at me, each one reflecting my own panic, my own terror. But as I approached, the eyes shifted as though they were alive. They blinked, they turned, they followed me. I dropped to my knees, the weight of their gaze pressing down on me like an unbearable force. I couldn't escape it. My mind was unraveling, my thoughts were no longer my own. The forest had claimed me, it had claimed everyone who had ever come through it, and now it was taking me as well. "Please," I whispered, but the voice in my head answered before I could even finish. "You are already ours." It said, its voice cold and final. I looked down at my hands, and for the first time I noticed that they were no longer mine. My skin had started to change, shifting like the bark of a tree. My nails had lengthened, and my fingers were growing rigid, hard like bone. The forest hunger was spreading through me, filling my veins with something dark and ancient. The forest had a way of turning its victims into something else, something new. And as I felt the last shreds of my humanity slipping away, I realized there was no way to stop it, no way to escape. The forest would feed on me, just as it had fed on so many before. The transformation didn't happen all at once, but I could feel it deep inside, a shifting sensation that made my skin crawl. At first it was subtle, an aching in my bones, a tingling along my spine, but then it grew stronger, faster. My limbs twisted, my muscles contorted in ways they never had before. The forest was changing me, remaking me into something that no longer resembled the man who had walked into these woods just days ago. I tried to scream to fight it, but the sound that left my throat wasn't human. It was a hollow noise, something primal and inhuman. And then I realized my mouth had begun to change too, my teeth growing sharp and jagged. My eyes, once clear, began to cloud over their whites, turning a murky forest green, and I could see everything. The trees, the roots, the creatures hiding beneath the soil. All of it was now part of me. "No," I gasped, clutching my chest as if to hold my own soul in place. But it was too late. I was already lost. The creature's eyes, those countless eyes, watched from the trees, from the shadows, as if waiting for me to give in completely, and I did. The hunger inside me was unbearable. It gnawed at my insides, urging me to feed, to embrace the forest as my own. I could feel the pull of the others, the ones who had come before me, whispers in the wind, urging me to become part of the ancient cycle. I turned away from the altar, no longer caring about the bones or the eyes. The forest was calling me now, and I could not resist. I moved, my new limbs carrying me effortlessly through the woods, the trees parting for me as if they knew who I was becoming. The others, those who had been consumed by this place, had left their marks on me, and now I was just another creature of the forest, another predator to join the ranks of those who had wandered too close. As I walked deeper into the heart of the bitterroot forest, I could hear the sound of footsteps behind me. Soft, slow, deliberate. It was the ranger, the one who had found my body, who had come searching for me. He wouldn't make it out. I knew that none of them ever did. The forest didn't let go. It fed on them, and it would feed on him too. I could feel his presence drawing closer, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. The forest had already claimed me, and I was no longer a man who could warn him or anyone else. I was something else now, something the forest had shaped and twisted into its own image. The others had been right. The forest was never going to let anyone leave, and so I joined them. I became just another whisper in the wind, another pair of eyes watching the next unfortunate soul who dared to enter the bitterroot forest. The cycle would continue forever. My name is Officer Riley Mason, and I've worked as a park ranger in Denali National Park for the past 7 years. The vast expanse of wilderness, Alaska's crown jewel. You'd think. After that much time, the wilderness would become predictable, routine even. But that's the thing about nature, it's never routine, not really. I remember the first time I saw something that didn't belong. It was the dead of winter, and the snow had been falling relentlessly for days. The park was quiet, the usual visitors long gone, leaving behind only the faint tracks of wildlife. That was the night it started. At first I thought it was just the isolation playing tricks on me, but the deeper I ventured into the forest, the more I began to feel something was off. There wasn't the cold or the wind, it was an unease that crept up your spine like a shadow, always just out of sight. The first attack happened just after midnight. I was patrolling the North Ridge when I saw movement in the trees. I was trying to stay alert, but what I saw didn't make sense. A silhouette, tall, far too tall, standing unnaturally still against the backdrop of the forest. It wasn't a bear or a moose, hell, it wasn't even human. It was something else entirely, something that made my instincts scream at me to turn around and run. I didn't. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was the need to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining things. Either way, I stepped forward, my flashlight cutting through the dark, and just like that, the figure was gone, swallowed whole by the trees. My heart was racing, but I pushed it down. It was probably just a trick of the light, I told myself. The next day I found the blood. It was in patches smeared across the snow, leading to a small clearing. What I found there will haunt me for the rest of my life, a carcass of a moose, its lens twisted in unnatural directions, eyes wide open in terror. It was clear something had torn it apart, but not like any predator. I knew this was something else, something dangerous. I reported the sighting, of course, but the higher-ups weren't interested. They told me to chalk it up to a bear, or maybe even wolves, but deep down I knew that wasn't right. I had seen enough carnage in the wilderness to recognize the work of predators, but this wasn't the work of anything I'd ever encountered. The weeks that followed were a blur of strange occurrences, more sightings, more blood, more questions, but I kept quiet. Who would believe me? I was just a ranger in the middle of nowhere. Then the more I thought about it, the more I realized if I went public with this, I might lose my job, or worse, end up on a list of crazy people. The government would never admit there was something out there. They didn't understand, so I kept my head down, continuing my patrols, but always on edge. Something was out there, something hunting us. It was a few weeks later when I met Sarah Thompson, a wildlife biologist who had been assigned to the park for a research project. She wasn't part of my usual crew, but her work had brought her into my territory more often than I'd have liked. The first time we spoke, she seemed normal enough, focused, articulate, and dedicated to her research. But there was something about her that felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. We crossed paths one late afternoon as I was heading back to the ranger station. She was standing by the edge of the forest, staring into the trees. I approached, figuring I'd ask if she needed anything or check if she was okay. As I got closer, I noticed her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes were wide, fixed on something beyond the tree line. "Sarah," I called out, trying to break her trance. She jumped, visibly startled. Her gaze snapped to me, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes before it was quickly masked by a forced smile. "Oh, Riley, didn't hear you there. I didn't buy it." She wasn't nervous about my presence. She was scared of something else, something in those woods. "Everything all right?" I asked. Stepping closer, "You look like you've seen a ghost." She hesitated before answering, her voice low. I don't know what it is. Something's out there. I've been hearing things, strange noises at night, and the animals are acting differently." I crossed my arms, my mind racing, so she'd noticed it too. "What kind of noises?" "Hard to describe," she said, her voice shaky. "At first I thought it was just the wind, but it's not. It's like something's walking around, something heavy, and I hear what sounds like breathing, deep, raspy breaths. It's not anything I've ever heard before." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was exactly what I'd experienced, the feeling of being watched, followed by that creeping sensation that something wasn't right. But I kept my cool, trying not to show how much her words were resonating with my own ears. "You think it's one of the animals?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head. "I don't think so. This feels different, like something else is out there." And that was the moment I realized that Sarah and I weren't just dealing with strange noises and cryptic signs. We were dealing with something we didn't understand, and I wasn't the only one who was beginning to notice the oddities in Denali. There was something hunting us, something that had been living in the shadows of these woods for far longer than we'd ever known. "You're not the only one," I said, finally breaking the silence between us. "I've seen things too, things that don't belong." Her eyes locked onto mine, wide with realization. "You know what's out there, don't you?" I wanted to lie, to tell her it was all in her head, that it was just the usual wildlife doing what it does. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't help, not anymore. "I don't know what it is, but I've seen it, and I think it's hunting us." The silence between us stretched on, heavy, intense. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the forest itself was waiting for something, for us to speak, to act, to acknowledge the danger we were in. But before either of us could say anything more, the unmistakable sound of a twig snapping echoed from deeper in the woods, followed by the sound of something large moving between the trees. My heart skipped it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. Whatever was out there had heard us, and it was getting closer. I didn't need to look at Sarah to know she was as terrified as I was. The sound of something big moving through the underbrush was unmistakable. It wasn't just the branches breaking underfoot. There was a weight behind it, something massive and purposeful. I could feel it in my bones, a primal sense of dread creeping through me, settling like a stone in my gut. Whatever it wasn't just curious. It was hunting. Stay behind me. I whispered to Sarah, my voice low but firm. I wasn't sure if I was trying to protect her or just trying to reassure myself. Either way, it didn't matter. I had to stay in control. I grabbed the flashlight at my belt, flicking it on and cutting through the thickening darkness of the woods. My hand was shaking, but I kept the beam steady. There was a part of me, a small part, that wanted to turn around and run, but I couldn't. Sarah was here with me, and we had no idea what was stalking us. The sounds were getting louder, now closer. Whatever it was circling us. I could hear the slow, deliberate crunch of snow underfoot, a breath, a low rasp coming from the darkness just beyond the edge of the light. Then suddenly there was silence. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you get when the wind dies down, but an eerie, oppressive kind of silence that makes every nerve in your body stand on edge. A kind that makes you realize too late that you're no longer alone. Riley, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, shaking with fear. What is it? I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't any animal I'd ever encountered in all my years working here. The predators of Denali were dangerous enough, but this felt wrong. This felt like something out of a nightmare. A shadow flickered in the corner of the light. Too quick to catch. Clearly I froze, heart racing, every muscle tense, waiting for the next move. But nothing came. No more sounds, no more movements. Did you see that? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Yeah, I said, my voice tight. I couldn't bring myself to explain what I'd seen, even though it was already burned into my memory. Something tall, something with limbs that stretched unnaturally, moving just beyond the light. A form that didn't fit into the natural world. And yet, it was here. We stood in the darkness, holding our breath, waiting. The air was thick, the tension was unbearable. Nami had to make a decision, stay and risk whatever that thing was, or head back to the station and pray. It didn't follow us. Before I could make up my mind, a voice broke through the silence. Riley, you have to get out of here now. I whipped around, my heart racing in my chest. It was one of my fellow rangers, Jack. He had appeared out of nowhere, moving quickly and quietly through the trees like he was part of the forest itself. His face was pale, his eyes wide, with a terror I hadn't seen from him before. There's something out here. Hey, Jack said, his voice low but urgent. And it's not alone. We have to go now. It was the last thing I needed to hear, but the fear in his voice told me we didn't have a choice. I turned to Sarah, my decision made. We're leaving now. But before we could take a step, a piercing howl split the night air, a sound like nothing I had ever heard before. Something deep and primal, a call that shook me to my core. It echoed across the park, reverberating off the mountains, bouncing back at us from every direction. I had no doubt it was calling to something calling to more. I had no word to learn anymore. We didn't wait. The sound of that howl had shattered whatever resolve we had left. I motioned for Sarah to move, and Jack took the lead, his steps swift and sure. The forest was no longer a familiar, comforting place. It was a labyrinth of shadows, a dangerous maze. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig felt like an alarm. The crunch of snow underfoot sounded louder with each step we took. Keep your eyes open, Jack muttered, his gaze flicking nervously over his shoulder. It's not just the thing we saw. It's something else, something watching. I didn't need to ask him to clarify. The fear in his voice said everything. The thing we had seen before, tall, shadowy, and unnatural, wasn't alone. There was something else out there, something that moved with intelligence, with purpose, and I had no idea how many there were. I just knew one thing. We weren't going to make it to the station if we didn't act fast. We kept moving, but the forest had become a maze of traps. The trees seemed to crowd in on us, the darkness pressing down from all sides. A fog had begun to roll in thick and suffocating, making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet in front of us. The air felt colder now, biting at my skin, and with each breath my lungs seemed to fill with more dread than oxygen. Then it happened. A flicker of movement. At first I thought it was just another trick of the fog. But no, it was real. A figure darting between the trees. It was there 1 second, gone the next. I could barely make out its shape, but I knew it wasn't human. Whatever it was, it moved too fast, too fluidly. There was no way it was just an animal. Did you see that? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my throat dry. I saw it. Jack didn't stop moving, but his pace quickened. Keep up, don't look back. Whatever you do, don't look back. I didn't have to be told twice. My heart was pounding in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins, but The fear was overwhelming, drowning out my thoughts. The trees around us felt like they were closing in, and the sound of something following us was growing louder. Something big, something fast. I could hear it now, the rhythm of footsteps behind us, too many, too deliberate. The sound was getting closer. I could feel the breath on the back of my neck, just barely there, but unmistakable. It was coming. Whatever it was closing in on us, and the only thing I could do was run. And then the ground beneath us shifted. The snow gave way, and with a sickening crack, the earth beneath my feet collapsed. I tumbled forward, my arms flailing as I tried to catch myself. I landed hard, the impact taking my breath away. My flashlight skidded across the ground, but it didn't go far before it was swallowed by the darkness. I could hear Sarah's voice, frantic, but I couldn't see her. The fog had closed in around us completely. "Now, Radley Jack, where are you?" I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind spinning. The hole wasn't deep, but it was enough to disorient me. I could barely see anything through the fog, but I could hear the sound of something heavy moving in the distance. Whatever it wasn't far. Then came the sound of more movement. Closer this time, almost directly above me. I looked up, but all I saw was the mist, swirling and thick, concealing everything beyond arm's reach. And then I saw it. The shape. The dark, looming figure emerged from the fog, standing just on the edge of the clearing, its outline barely visible in the shadows. It wasn't human, it was an animal. It was something in between. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, predatory and hungry. It knew we were there. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The creature was staring directly at me, and for a moment, all I could do was stare back. Then the howl came again, this time closer. I didn't need to ask, I didn't need to think. We weren't going to outrun it, but we had to try. "Sarah, Jack," I screamed, my voice hoarse, cracking. "We have to move now." The fog closed and tightened, swallowing us whole. I couldn't see Sarah, I couldn't see Jack, but I could hear them, their frantic voices calling out, the sound of feet stumbling through the snow, desperate and confused. My mind raced as I scrambled, trying to get a grip on the situation. Every nerve was on fire, and the sensation of being hunted was suffocating. Then the howl ripped through the air again, closer than before. It sent a chill down my spine, a primal deep fear that froze me in place. It was getting closer, too close for comfort. My heart was in my throat, my hands were trembling, but I had forced myself to keep moving. There was no time to waste. We had to get out of here. Whatever that thing was, we couldn't outrun it if we didn't find shelter, if we didn't regroup. Riley, Sarah's voice broke through the fog, faint but clear. She was close, but how close I couldn't tell. The sound of footsteps grew louder, the crunching of snow, the subtle movements that spoke of something predatory circling. I was being stalked, and I knew it. My eyes darted left and right, searching the trees for any sign of movement, any hint of where the threat was. Sarah, I shouted again, louder this time, my voice shaking with urgency. "Stay close." But the fog seemed to distort everything. The world around me was disorienting, surreal, and my sense of direction had abandoned me. Every step I took felt like I was walking in circles, running on instinct. The cold air burned in my lungs, and the weight of what was happening pressed down on me like 1,000 tons of stone. And I heard it, a growl, low rumbling and savage coming from somewhere behind me. It was closer now, so close. I could feel the vibration in my chest. The growl wasn't from an animal, it was something else. It was a warning. Panic surged through me, but I knew if I didn't stay calm, we wouldn't make it out. I pushed forward, forcing my legs to move even as they screamed in protest. I had to find Sarah. I had to find Jack. I had to get out of this nightmare. Riley, help me. Sarah's voice trembled in the distance, followed by a sharp scream, then silence. The blood drained from my face. No, this wasn't happening. I couldn't lose her. I couldn't let whatever that thing was get to her. Sarah, I cried, my voice breaking as I spun around, scanning the fog for any sign of her. Where are you? There was no answer, only the sickening sound of something moving just beyond my reach, something that was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I kept moving, stumbling through the fog, the growl growing louder, closer. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow shift, a silhouette against the fog, larger than any animal should be, standing still and watching me. My breath caught in my throat. It was one of them, the creature. Its eyes gleamed with a cold, unnatural light, locking onto mine, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought it was going to attack. But it didn't. It just stood there watching as if toying with me. And all that I had to do, I had no choice. The only chance we had was to fight back, to face this thing head on, no matter how terrifying it was. My instinct screamed at me to run to save myself, but I couldn't leave Sarah, not without a fight. I reached for my sidearm, my fingers numb, fumbling for the cold metal of the gun I kept strapped to my belt. I hadn't wanted to use it and hoped it wouldn't come to that, but now it felt like the only way out. Before I could pull it free, the creature moved. It was fast, too fast, and before I could react, it was on me, its claws raking across the air, missing me by inches. I didn't hesitate. I drew the weapon, aimed, and fired. The shot rang out loud in the stillness, deafening against the silence of the forest. The creature let out a terrible screech as the bullet hit its shoulder, but it didn't fall. Instead, it hissed low and menacing, its eyes filled with rage. The sound of movement around me intensified. I wasn't alone anymore. There were others, more of them, emerging from the shadows like phantoms surrounding me. Jack, where are you? I screamed, hoping he could hear me, hoping he was still alive. The creatures didn't wait for an answer. They moved toward me, relentless, and for the first time since all this started, I felt fear creep in, real fear. I wasn't going to make it out of here alive. The world seemed to collapse around me as the creatures closed in their eyes, burned with that unnatural predatory glow, and I could hear the rapid, uneven breathing of more than one in the air around me. It felt as though they were moving in a calculated pattern, tightening the noose around us. I couldn't stop them all. There were too many. My mind raced as I fumbled for the flashlight in my pocket, desperately shining the beam into the fog. It did little to help, but it bought me a second of clarity. I could barely see Sarah's silhouette now, barely hear her panic breathing, but she was still alive. That much I knew. The growls of the creatures intensified a low, primal sound that resonated deep in my bones. They were taunting us, circling us, waiting for us to make a mistake. I glanced over at Jack, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear, but his hand was steady as he reached for his weapon. The gunfire had bought us a moment, but wouldn't hold them off forever. We couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding. We had to make a stand. I turned to Sarah, urgency in my voice. We need to move. Head for the ridge. There's a chance we can get higher ground. The station's still a few miles out, but you'll find shelter. She nodded, her face drawn and pale. I could see the terror in her eyes, the same fear I felt gnawing at my insides. But there was no time to comfort her. We couldn't waste a single second. We're gonna have to be fast, Jack said, his voice firm, despite the fear in his eyes. Stay together, no matter what. We didn't have a choice. I grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her along as we started moving again, pushing through the fog, stumbling through the deep snow. My legs were heavy. Every step, a battle against exhaustion. But I kept going for her, for all of us. But the creatures weren't far behind. I could hear them, their movements slow and deliberate, their growls echoing through the trees. They were toying with us, keeping their distance just enough to make sure we couldn't escape. I knew they were waiting for the right moment to strike. And I heard it, a sudden deafening roar that shook the ground beneath us. It wasn't just one of them, it was all of them. The sound echoed through the forest like 100 voices screaming in unison, a chorus of madness. "Run," I screamed, pushing Sarah ahead of me. Jack was already on the move, his steps quick and sure, but we were out of time. I could hear the creatures behind us, their footsteps crashing through the snow. Too close, too fast. We were almost to the ridge when I felt it, something sharp like claws raking against my back, tearing through my jacket. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't see anything, just the fog swirling, the shadows dancing in the mist. Then the clawing sensation came again. And this time I didn't hesitate. I whipped around, gun raised, and fired blindly into the darkness. The shot rang out, echoing, but it didn't stop the creature, it didn't even slow it down. We were too close, too exposed. Something huge crashed into me from behind, knocking me to the ground. My breath whooshed out of my chest and I gasped for air as something cold and wet pressed against my face. The scent of something rancid filled my nostrils. Overwhelming. The flashlight had fallen from my pocket, rolling into the snow and casting an eerie, flickering light over the scene. And then I saw it. The creature. It wasn't like the others. It was bigger, massive, its body covered in matted fur. Its eyes glowing red like burning coals. It towered over me, its breath hot and foul against my skin, its claws extending like daggers. I froze, unable to move, unable to think. But then I heard Sarah scream. The creature's head snapped toward her, its eyes narrowing, and for the first time I saw something almost human in its gaze, something calculating. It was torn between me and her, and that moment of hesitation, that split second, was all I needed. I shoved the creature off me with all my strength, rolling away from it. My gun was still in my hand, my finger instinctively pulling the trigger. The creature screeched as the bullet struck its side, but it didn't fall. It snarled, its mouth snapping open, revealing teeth like jagged knives. I fired again. The creature staggered, its movements slower now, as though the bullet had struck something vital. It bawled a sound that echoed through the forest. It didn't charge, it didn't advance. Instead, it paused, its red eyes locked onto mine. A deep growl rumbling in its throat. For a long moment we stood there, facing each other. The fog thickened, the air colder. The creatures were still watching us, waiting, but I knew something had changed. We were going to escape this, not like this. The creature let out one final blood-curdling scream, then turned and disappeared into the mist, its massive form swallowed up by the fog. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around trying to catch my breath. Sol and Jack were still alive, but barely. Jack was breathing hard, his eyes wide with terror, and Sarah was clinging to him, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. We had survived, but we had no idea what was still out there, what the creatures wanted, or how long they would be content to leave us alone. All I knew was this. The wilderness of Denali had become a battleground, and we were its prey, and we were far from safe. My boyfriend and I share a house with a couple of friends temporarily. One is in the military and was gone for training when this happened. The other goes to mechanic school at night and doesn't get back to the house until after 10 p.m. My boyfriend is usually home from between 8 and 9, but most of the time he picks me up to run his errands, with him picking up deposits from the stores, etc. During the week, I am home alone from around noon until around 8 or so. This night, however, my boyfriend had a meeting directly after work, and those always last a couple of hours. I have absolutely horrific migraines, so I was hurting really bad. I took something and laid down. The boyfriend came home at one point during the day. He's a manager, and some days he just floats to help stores that need help to grab something he needed. And then he left. I apparently fell asleep right after that. I woke up around 8:30 and noticed he wasn't home. I figured he would be soon, and I fell back asleep. A little after 9, I woke up and I couldn't figure out why he wasn't home. Then I remembered his meeting and just decided to watch some Netflix. I should mention that we recently had someone move out. She was given 30 days to leave, so we changed the locks when she left. The guy who owns the house, one of the friends we live with, and me are the only ones with keys at this point because the military guy was gone and my boyfriend hadn't gotten a chance to make a copy yet. I told him every day to take my key, but he never did. He would go through the unlocked back door and then leave through the front door, which he couldn't lock. That was the situation on this day. One of the friends, one that owns the house, has 2 big dogs. One is a couple of years old and sometimes just barks to bark. I think the other is a lot older and he only barks if something is up. I've also learned the difference in the barks from the younger dog. Around 9, both dogs started going absolutely crazy. They only bark like that when someone is outside the house, like when their owner comes home from school. Someone is here doing yard work, etc. I look out my window, but it's obviously dark outside and I don't see anything. I try to stay calm and just wait till my boyfriend gets home from his meeting. Whatever that would be, my cat freaks out if he hears anything.
In the hallway, which runs in front of my door, he was sleeping, so I figured all was good.
Around 9:45, I had to go to the bathroom and I couldn't hold it any longer. I poked my head out the door and looked left to the other side of the house. Of course, that side is pitch dark because he won't be home from school for at least another half hour. The bathroom is directly across the narrow hall for me and one door to the left. I practically leap into the bathroom from our bedroom and shut the door. While I'm in there, I hear some loud thudding near the door and a sound like one of those big rubber dog bones bouncing and hitting the baseboard of the wall. I dial 911 on my phone, but I don't press send. I just had it ready in case. I peek out the door and there is no dog bone and no toy that could have caused that noise. I sprint back into the bedroom and lock the door. After I get in the room and get back in bed, the dogs start going crazy again. Suddenly my cat jumps awake and went into, should I run or should I attack position, staring intently at the bedroom door with his ears back. At this point I am really scared. I text my boyfriend and ask him to please let me know when he's pulling up at home so I can unlock the bedroom door and I'll know it's him at the door and that I would explain later. He calls me immediately and asks me what was wrong. Turns out he's about to turn on our road. Thank God, I tell him what happened and he goes, stay in the bedroom with the door locked until I tell you it's okay to open it, and he stays on the phone with me. He tells me he's killing his lights and quietly pulling into the driveway. He is a hybrid and then he's gonna bust into the house. He busts into the house. The dogs don't make a sound, even considering they didn't hear him pull up. He wasn't a stranger, so they didn't bark. He runs the kitchen and grabs a giant knife and searches every single inch of the house. He did one pass through and then told me it was okay. He opened the door to see if I heard anything else and then goes for a second inspection of the house. He said the back storm door was open a bit, even though he shut it before when he went through it to get in the house earlier in the day. The dogs can't open that door, so it definitely wasn't them. He didn't see anything strange or moved in the house and said that if someone had been outside, either he or the dog scared them off. He got up early the next morning and made a key. Now the doors stay completely locked. I never thought I'd find myself staring at the thick fog rolling through the woods of Pinwood National Park, the kind that seeps into your lungs, heavy and damp like the trees themselves are trying to swallow you whole. But that's where I was standing at the trailhead. The only sound is the occasional rustle of branches or distant calls of birds, as if the whole forest had its own secret to keep. I'm Jesse, a park ranger. I'd been working here for over a decade, patrolling these woods, answering calls, and calming hikers. There's nothing that scares me about these woods. Nothing. I've seen it all: wild animals, lost hikers, the usual. But today I was called in for something unusual. A report came in about a hiker named Tom. Tom had been on the trail near Goatman's Bridge. The bridge had a reputation, locals said. Strange things happened there. People disappearing, whispers in the wind. The kind of stuff that makes you laugh at first but makes you think twice if you hear it enough. Tom's claim was even stranger. He said he saw himself in the woods. I didn't take him seriously at first. Who would? Exhaustion, hallucinations, paranoia, those things happen in the woods. When I met Tom at the ranger station, his eyes were wide and jittery. He looked like someone who'd seen something he wasn't meant to. I remember the way his hands trembled as he spoke. I was walking just like any other hike when I saw someone up ahead. Tom began speaking in a barely audible whisper. I called out, but the person didn't move. I thought it might be someone else on the trail, maybe a ranger. But when I got closer, I saw that it was me. My skepticism rose, but I kept my face neutral. "What do you mean?" "It was yaw," Tom said, looking me in the eye with a shiver running down his spine. "It was me, but not the eyes, Jesse. The eyes were wrong. The way it looked at me wasn't right. It moved like me, talked like me, but something about it wasn't human." I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but something about Tom's desperation in his voice made me hesitate. Still, I had a job to do. Missing campers. A search was needed. So I told Tom to stay put and headed to Goatman's Bridge to start the investigation. As I ventured deeper into the woods, something gnawed at the back of my mind. Something about Tom's words wouldn't let me go. I thought about how strange it was, how the forest seemed too quiet, but I shook it off. There was no time to entertain doubts. I hadn't heard anything yet that couldn't be explained. Yet the campground was eerily silent. When I arrived, the only noise, the whisper of wind through the trees. It didn't feel right. The usual bustle of campers was absent. No laughter, no chatter, just the scattered remnants of abandoned tents and equipment. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I walked deeper into the clearing. Empty water bottles, scattered clothes, and half-eaten meals were strewn across the site, but there was no sign of the campers. I scanned the area, my instincts kicking in as I methodically checked the grounds. Nothing. The hairs on my arms were still on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I made my way toward the trees, I found myself thinking about Tom's words again. It was me, but it echoed in my mind like a broken record. "Jesse, you find anything?" The voice startled me. I turned to see Dale, another ranger, walking toward me from the far side of the camp. "No," I replied, my voice flat, still scanning the site. "I'm just getting started." Dale paused for a moment, eyeing me curiously. "You good? You look a little..." He trailed off, seemingly unsure how to finish the sentence. "I'm fine." I snapped, not meaning to sound harsh, but I was already on edge. The weirdness of the situation was starting to seep into my bone. My thoughts kept returning to the missing campers. What happened to them, and why did I feel so unsettled here? Dale gave me a long look, but said nothing more. We split up to cover more ground, each of us taking a different path through the woods. As I walked through the dense trees, I tried to focus on my job, to ignore the creeping sense of paranoia that was making my skin crawl. And then I heard it, "Jesse." It was my voice, clear and unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze mid-step. My eyes darted around the woods, scanning every inch of the trees, the ground, the shadows, but there was no one at all. I shook my head. It had to be a trick. My mind was playing games on me, just like it did with Tom. Exhaustion, isolation, stress, that was all. But as I continued to walk, I heard it again, Jesse, louder this time, coming from behind me. I spun around, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts, but again there was no one, only the wind, the trees, and the ever-present fog that seemed to be rolling in thicker by the minute. I forced myself to continue. It was all in my head, but the voice lingered, echoing in the space between my ears. Was I losing my mind? I wasn't the type to let paranoia take over, but something about this place was breaking through the veneer of my calm. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to twist around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The forest felt alive with an unsettling energy as I pushed further into the woods. The deeper I went, the more the sense of being followed crept into my mind. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snap of a twig felt like it was just behind me, just out of sight. I kept telling myself it was just my nerves, that the isolation was playing tricks on me. But the eerie quiet, the absence of birds and insects, wasn't helping. It wasn't long before I saw them. At first I thought I was imagining it, distant figures moving just out of my reach. But as I moved closer, the shapes became clearer. There were people standing in the clearing up ahead, but something about them felt off. It was like looking at a reflection in a funhouse mirror, distorted but still somehow familiar. I could see the outlines of faces, the glint of eyes, but none of it felt real. They were too still, too silent. My heart pounded in my chest. As I approached cautiously, I called out to them, but they didn't respond. "Hey, are you all right?" The words felt thin in the thick, oppressive silence. Still no response. The figures remained motionless, like mannequins frozen in place. I took a few tentative steps closer, each footfall sending a ripple of unease through me. Then a voice, my voice, cut through the quiet. "Jesse, it's not them." The voice said it was my own voice, but distorted, hollow, almost a mockery. I froze, my mind reeling. I turned, scanning the forest, but no one was there. It had to be a trick. The isolation was messing with my head. But as I turned back to the figures, one of them moved slowly, deliberately, shifting its head to look at me. I took a step back. The figure smiled. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The smile, it wasn't right. The eyes were too wide, too empty. They stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then something worse happened. A second figure moved, this one closer to the first. It was another version of me standing in the middle of the clearing, grinning in that same unnatural way. And my breath caught in my throat. I backed away, my legs trembling, but my feet wouldn't move fast enough. The figures, each one mirroring a different person from the campsite, started to speak at once, their voices blending into a chorus. But it wasn't right. Their words were garbled, broken, as if they were trying too hard to mimic human speech, but couldn't quite get it right. My own name echoed through the clearing, each repetition coming from a different mouth. "Jesse, help us, Jesse, they're not who they say they are." The words twisted in my mind, and I stumbled back, tripping over a root and falling hard onto the ground. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pushed myself up. My eyes still locked on the figures, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. There was something magnetic about them, something that drew me in, made me doubt what I was seeing. Were they real or were they something else, something pretending to be human? A movement in the corner of my eye made me jerk my head around. There in the distance I saw the real campers, the ones who had gone missing. They were huddled together, looking frantic, pleading with me to help them. But I could hear their voices too, their cries blending with the hollow imitations. Was it them or was it the doppelgangers trying to trap me? I didn't know who to trust anymore. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. The line between reality and delusion was blurring, and I was no longer sure if I was the hunter or the hunted. I stood frozen, my mind spiraling into confusion. The forest around me seemed to close in the trees, pressing in as if they were watching, waiting the figures. Those doppelgangers still stood in the clearing, their eyes trained on me with that unsettling mocking. And then there was the voice again, my own voice, cutting through the silence. "Jesse, you know what this is?" I gripped my flashlight tighter, almost hoping the light would dispel the nightmare, but it didn't. The beam flickered as if the forest itself was rejecting it. Panic was creeping up on me, clawing at my chest. My pulse thundered in my ears as I turned in circles trying to make sense of everything. The real campers, still cowering in the distance, were shouting my name, but their words felt foreign and distant. Jesse helped. They cried, but their voices were drowned out by the incessant chorus of those other voices, the ones that weren't quite right. My knees buckled and I fell to the ground. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, I couldn't focus. And then, like a floodgate breaking, a memory from the past surged to the front of my mind. The old legends I'd heard growing up about Goblin. They were just stories, ghost stories, told around campfires by the older rangers. But now, as I looked at these figures that weren't people, the old tales started to make sense. The Goblin was no mere cryptid. It was a trickster, a shapeshifter, a predator that took on the appearance of those it hunted, mimicking not just their looks, but their mannerisms, their voices. The creature couldn't replicate human behavior, though that was the key. It could copy everything about a person, but it couldn't fake the subtle things, those little imperfections, the way we moved when no one was watching, the way we reacted. To stress, for instance. That's when I understood what I had to do. I forced myself to my feet, shaky but resolute. The campers, real or not, were still pleading with me, but I couldn't trust them. I had to test them. I had to make them prove they were who they said they were. I approached the first group of doppelgangers, my heart hammering in my chest. They didn't move as I approached, standing like statues, staring at me with those wide, lifeless eyes. I knew I had only one shot at this. "Tell me your name," I said. My voice harshened in the cold air. The figure closest to me hesitated, a flicker of hesitation passing across its face. The movement was too slow, too unnatural. It was the same hesitation I'd seen in those other imposters, those who couldn't mimic the small unconscious responses that made us human. The thing in front of me opened its mouth, but it was like watching a puppet trying to form words. It couldn't do it. "Tell me your name," I repeated, this time with more force. The figure shifted its face, twisting its eyes, darting as if it was searching for the right words, searching for a response that would pass for human. But it couldn't find it. It stepped back, its grin widening as if taunting me. I wasn't waiting any longer. I knew what this was, and I wasn't going to let it drag me into the madness any further. I pulled my gun from my holster and aimed it at the creature. "Move away from them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, as I turned to face the others. That's when I saw it, the second figure, the one that looked just like me. It grinned, a twisted mockery of my own expression, and started to step forward. I didn't hesitate. I fired. The shot rang out in the silence, the sound harsh and jagged like a scream breaking the stillness. The figure jerked back, its form rippling like water. The grin twisted further and the thing collapsed in on itself, its features melting and warping into something unrecognizable. What remained was a massive fur, grotesque limbs, and a gaping mouth that shrieked no, screamed its rage. But the sound wasn't human. The body shuddered and contorted violently, its form writhing as though it were being pulled apart. I could hear it gurgling the horrible sound of something dying, and the air smelled sour like rot. The remaining doppelgangers froze in place. They didn't move, didn't flinch. They just stared at me, their eyes wide and vacant. But the terror in my chest wasn't from them anymore. It was from the thing that had once looked like me. The air around us crackled, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figures dissolved into a haze of dark smoke, leaving nothing behind but the faintest echo of their presence. I was left standing there alone, bloodied hands trembling as I looked at the wreckage of the Goatman's disguise. The weight of the gun was suddenly too much to bear, and I lowered it slowly. My mind was racing, but I knew one thing for sure: the goat man was dead, at least for now. But in the back of my mind, the chilling thought lingered. What if I wasn't the one who had killed it? What if the real Jesse was already gone? I turned to the campers, if they were even the real ones, and slowly, carefully made my way toward them. The forest around me was eerily still, a sense of dread lingering like a bad taste in my mouth. The campers, their faces, a mix of fear and confusion, were still huddled together in the clearing. They were watching me carefully, their eyes flicking from the spot where the goat man's form had dissolved into the air to me, the man who had fired the shot. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I approached them, but something about their eyes, those wide, haunted eyes, made me hesitate. They seemed too calm too, still almost perfect. I knew what I had to do, but for a brief moment doubt crept into my mind. Had I trusted them, or had I been duped once again by the goat man's tricks? "Are you real?" I asked, my voice hoarse and unsure. The first camper, a man who looked like he had been in his 20s, swallowed hard before speaking. "Yes, we're real, Jesse. We saw everything what you did." He said my name, and it should have been comforting, but it felt off, like he was testing the sound of it on his lips. I narrowed my eyes, unsure of what to believe. "What's your name?" He paused for a moment, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Tom," he replied. His eyes flickered, but there was a slight hesitation in his voice. It wasn't enough to satisfy me. I needed more. "Tom, tell me something." "Only the real Tom would know," I said, my voice rising in tension. The camper shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances, but it was Tom who spoke first, his voice wavering. "Yeah, we used to play soccer together in high school. You remember when you kicked that penalty shot that hit the post during the tournament?" I didn't know if he was being honest or just playing along, but it was something about the way he said it that felt rehearsed. My gut twisted. It wasn't a good feeling. I talked to the others, each of them giving me similar stories, similar memories, but none of it felt right. None of it felt real. It was as though they were echoing my past back at me, as if they had learned everything about me and were parroting it to pass as human. They know how to whisper, soft and insistent, tugging at the edge of my mind. What if you're the one who isn't real? I froze. The words hit me like a slap and my body went rigid. The thought was impossible. I was standing here right in front of them. I had just killed the goat man. I had just saved them. But something deep inside me, something primal, shuddered with doubt. "You're not real," I muttered almost to myself. My voice sounded hollow in the silence of the forest. Tom's expression faltered, a shadow passing over his face. "Jesse, what are you talking about?" I turned to face him fully, the weight of the question pressing on me. "Tell me, Tom, tell me something." Only the real Tom would know something that I would know. His eyes darted away, his lips pressing into a thin line, but the hesitation was enough. I saw just a flicker of uncertainty, like he was struggling to remember. But the words didn't come. Instead, he froze completely. I can't," he whispered. That was it. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me. They weren't real, none of them were. The goat man had done it again. It had made me question myself, made me doubt the very nature of my existence. The thing had turned everything I knew upside down. And then, as if on cue, the clearing went dark. The moon was blotted out by thick clouds, and the silence of the forest became suffocating. Like the very air had thickened the campers' faces contorted, twisting in grotesque mockery of what they had once been. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, a horrible gut-wrenching chill seeping into my bone. The goat man's game wasn't over. It was never over. I reached for my gun again, my fingers trembling as I gripped it. But my mind was spinning the world around me, distorting as the doppelgangers of the campers closed in their steps, silent, their movements fluid and unnervingly coordinated. This time, though, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't hesitate. I couldn't second-guess myself. I fired the shots, ringing out one after another. The first camper dropped, a twisted, lifeless thing, his features contorting like clay under pressure. Then the others followed suit, each shot striking true, each body crumpling to the ground in a grotesque, unnatural fall. But as the last doppelganger fell, something changed in the forest. The air grew thick, the trees creaking and groaning as if they were alive. I turned to face the clearing once again, knowing the worst was yet to come. There was no victory. Not yet. The goatman was still watching, and as I turned toward the bridge, I saw him, the real goatman. The creature stood on the edge of the old, decaying bridge, watching me with its glowing eyes. Its twisted wan form was a grotesque silhouette in the moonlight, and I knew then with absolute certainty that I was never meant to escape. It was over, or at least it had only just begun. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest as the goatman stared me down from the bridge. Its monstrous figure loomed, tall and menacing. The faintest glint of moonlight caught the edges of its twisted horns. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The reality of what was happening sank in, suffocating me with the weight of my own terror. I had killed the doppelgangers. I had stopped the creature's games, or so I thought. But standing there facing the real goatman, I realized I had made a grave mistake. The thing I had been chasing was not something that could be destroyed with a bullet or a moment of courage. It was an ancient predatory force, one that thrived on confusion, fear, and the subtle trickery of human minds. The goatman tilted its head slightly as if amused by my paralysis. Its eyes glowed with an unsettling, unnatural light, like two flickering candles in the dark. There was no noise, no movement from it, just the unnerving stillness of something far too ancient to be afraid of. Man, you. I managed to choke out my voice, barely a whisper in the thick, oppressive silence of the forest. What are you? The creature didn't respond. Instead, it began to move, slow and deliberate, crossing the bridge with a fluid, almost graceful motion, as if the rotting wood beneath it didn't exist. Its body shifted and twisted unnaturally, its form distorting with every step. It didn't need to run, it didn't need to hurry, it had all the time in the world. I took a step back, my hand instinctively reaching for my gun again, but this time the gun felt like an inadequate tool against something so much older, so much darker than anything I had ever faced. It was no longer about survival. It was about a test, a game, and I was the pawn. You thought you could escape. The goatman's voice rasped in my mind, low and unsettling. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but a presence I felt deep within my skull, twisting my thoughts. But this game doesn't end. I staggered back, trying to shake the feeling of its words crawling inside my head. My hands trembled as I tried to steady myself, but it was no use. I couldn't get away from the truth. There was no escaping it. The goatman had made me a part of its eternal game. You've taken my toll. The goatman continued, its voice slithering around me, filling my mind with dread. Now you belong to me, Jesse. The weight of its words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer force of its presence. The air grew colder, the trees around me warping into grotesque shapes, their twisted limbs reaching toward me like the hands of the dead. And then the worst part. The realization that I wasn't the only one trapped in this nightmare. The faces of the campers flashed in my mind. They had been caught in the same trap, the same illusion, and now I was part of it too. We were all pawns, all trapped in the same never-ending cycle of terror. The goatman's form shifted once more, its body contorting into something even more grotesque, more twisted. The air seemed to warp around it like it was drawing the very essence of the forest into itself. I felt a horrible tug at my consciousness, a feeling that I was slipping away, becoming something less than human, something far more monstrous. "You will return," it said in time. "You will return to this place again and again. And each time you will forget, you will doubt, and you will begin the game once more." I tried to resist, tried to scream to break free from its grip, but the forest around me seemed to close in the ground beneath my feet, turning to a shifting black sludge that dragged at my ankles. I couldn't escape, and then it was gone. The goat man vanished, leaving me standing alone in the clearing, breathless and disoriented. The forest was still, the trees had returned to their normal shapes, the fog lifting ever so slightly to reveal the pale light of the moon. I'd been working as a park ranger on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota for the better part of 15 years. This land, with its rolling prairies and hidden forests, holds a beauty that's both serene and unforgiving, but it's also home to things that you won't find on any map or guidebook, things that don't belong in this world. The locals talk about them in hushed tones, stories passed down from elders who claim to have seen the impossible. Most dismiss them as mere folklore tales to scare children into behaving, but I've seen enough to know better. There's something here, something that defies explanation. It started 3 months ago. A couple of hikers went missing, a father and his teenage son. They'd come from out of state looking to experience the natural beauty of the reservation. The father was an experienced outdoorsman, the kind who knew how to navigate rough terrain. When they didn't return, a search party was quickly organized. I led the search myself. We found their camp first. Torn to shreds, supplies scattered like some wild animal had gone through them. There are no signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing to suggest what might have happened, just an eerie silence that hung in the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We found the boy 2 days later, or what was left of him. His body was lying at the bottom of a ravine, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. The look on his face, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream, told me that whatever he saw before he died was something no person should ever have to witness. His father was never found. That was just the beginning. Reports started flooding in, hunters disappearing without a trace, strange footprints appearing in the dirt, livestock found dead, their carcasses drained of blood. The stories grew wilder with each passing week. Some claimed to have seen creatures moving through the woods at night, creatures that walked on 2 legs but were too large to be human. They dismissed most of it at first. It's easy to let fear and imagination run wild in a place as remote as Pine Ridge, but then I saw them. I was patrolling the northern edge of the reservation near a patch of dense forest that few dare to enter. The locals call it the dead zone, a place where the trees grow too close together, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocks out the sun. It's always darker there, even in the middle of the day. I was about to turn back when I heard it, a low, gravelly growl that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I froze, listening. The growl came again, followed by the sound of something moving through the underbrush, something big. I drew my flashlight and scanned the trees. At first I saw nothing. Then my beam caught a pair of eyes reflecting the light, eyes that were too high off the ground to belong to any known animal. They were watching me, unblinking, as if weighing whether I was prey or just another intruder to be ignored. I took a step back, my hand reaching for the radio on my belt, but before I could call for help, it lunged at me. A massive shape burst from the trees, moving faster than anything that size should be able to. I caught only a glimpse, dark fur, long limbs, and a mouth filled with teeth that gleamed in the light. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't remember how I made it back to the ranger station. The next thing I knew, I was locking the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to convince myself it was a bear, maybe a mountain lion, but I knew better, the eyes, the way it moved. This was no ordinary predator. Since then, I've been keeping a close eye on the dead zone. I've noticed the signs, patterns in the way animals avoid the area, how the air turns cold and still when you get too close. I'm convinced there's a nest of them in there, a pack, or maybe something worse. They were breeding, multiplying, and it's only a matter of time before they venture out of the forest in search of new hunting grounds. I've warned the local authorities, but they won't listen. They say it's just wild animals, that there's no such thing as cryptids, but then when I saw it, I know that something is out there waiting. So if you're thinking about coming to Pine Ridge, do yourself a favor. Stay away from the northern forest. If you hear something moving in the dark, don't try to be a hero. Turn around and get out while you still can, because once you're on their turf, it's already too late. I graduated high school this year, and my friends and I decided to go camping at Bella Plain. We rented a yurt for 3 days with my cousin Kay and my friend B splitting the cost. I bought food, burgers, and hot dogs in a case of water. My cousin brought a cooler, spatula, and ice, while our friend brought nothing. Using the reasoning that he helped pay for the campsite, I decided not to argue since it would be useless. A friend of my cousin T showed up on the second day with vodka, moonshine, and weed because my job drug tests. I didn't smoke. I'm a lightweight, so I also didn't drink. I was the only sober one the entire trip, which I didn't mind since someone had to explain to the park ranger why 2 underage kids and a barely adult were somewhere in the stratosphere when we weren't supposed to have any kind of food, drink, or fire in the yurt. They decided to go to the snack stand by the lake to buy food so they could fight off the munchies. The guy who ran the stand loved our little group since we spent more on food than any other customers he ever gets. He even let us use the rental canoes for as long as we wanted. I decided they were sober enough to go on their own and elected to stay behind napping and reading some lots since my phone had no service. I had finished the book and fallen asleep, only to be woken up by B and K telling me that T was missing. They would come straight out and say, I felt like K can even stand him since he always acts like some macho douche to everyone. So, as messed up as it sounds, I wasn't too sad to hear it. They dragged me out of my bunk to help search, barely giving me time to put all my boots and slip knives into my pockets. I have a slight obsession with knives and usually carry 2 or 3 on me. What I pieced together from B and K was that they had run into a girl who struck up a conversation with T and invited him back to her campsite for a party, or at least that's what T told them. T and K hadn't heard a single word, she said, despite the fact that she and T had only been standing a few feet away from them. They also told me they hadn't seen her face the entire time they were near her and that she had been actively hiding it from them. My first thought wasn't that it was paranormal, but that a group of people had lured T to their campsite with the promise of booze, bud, and sex, 3 things he loves. Only 2 of which he's actually had. He loves to brag about his alleged conquests, even taking pictures of women off Google and claiming he's bedded them. My best guess was that he saw this as an opportunity to have something to actually brag about. It wasn't until we had searched the entire campgrounds and the accessible woods for him that I started to think this might not be as normal as I thought. We kept searching, with B spouting whatever supernatural BS he thought he knew. He does this a lot, and I usually ignore it as stupidity since most of what he says sounds made up. He kept going on about what creatures might have abducted Tommy, ranging from banshees to vampires. I didn't pay much attention to him, mostly because they would have heard a banshee or vampire talking to T if that were the case. We kept searching until it got dark, then returned to the yurt. When we got there, the door was unlocked and music was playing inside. The door being unlocked was strange enough since there was only 1 key and we had it on us. I even made sure to lock the door when we left. When we walked in, we found T lying in his bunk playing music through a Bluetooth speaker. When we asked him where he went, he said he didn't know what we were talking about and that he hadn't left the tent. He thought we hadn't even left to go to the snack stand. Yet, I don't know if my friends were messing with me or what, but it still creeps me out. All I know is that I don't think I ever want to go to Bella Plain alone. Not sure, but I can tell you that about 5 years ago, at the height of my interest in black-eyed kids, I was listening to podcasts and reading encounters. I was on vacation at an Airbnb in Manistee, Michigan, and in the middle of the night, around 3 a.m., I was woken up by someone loudly banging on the front door. Through the window, I saw that it was a woman with wild hair. I don't remember what she was wearing, but I couldn't see her face through the hair. My parents woke up and asked, should we open it? But something chilled me. I realized it was because she was completely silent as she banged on the door. If she needed help, wouldn't she be saying, help, please help me, or something? Even if she was trying to rob us, you'd think feigning needing help would be smarter than just frantically banging. After I convinced everyone not to open the door, she eventually moved on to another house across the street. Easily might not be related at all and could just be a completely non-paranormal event, but I had literally been listening to black-eyed kids podcasts that whole trippin' was reading stories about them before falling asleep. The weird coincidence of receiving my own creepy visitor in the night freaked me out and made me take a step back. This experience was over 60 years ago and happened when I was only about 4 or 5 years old and living in the East Bronx of New York City. I have spent much of the rest of my life absorbing whatever technology changes I could encounter in an effort to validate and verify or understand better some of the things the crew of the vessel taught me. It has been hard because we are still way behind the technology level. I saw as a first grader. Way back then, my parents owned a small house on Creston Ave, and my father earned a moderate income. My bedroom was on the second floor rear, and the window overlooked the roof of the back porch. I had no brothers or sisters. Late one night, a tube radio in my room began making a squeal noise and awoke me. I went to it, and although very young, understood how an on-off switch worked and made sure it was off. The noise stopped, and I went back to bed. Then something tapped on my window. I looked and saw what looked in the dark like a small person, about my size, standing on the roof outside. I was about to go and get my parents when I heard him ask in my head if he could come in. I started to tell him the window was locked and I wasn't big enough to reach the lock, and he thought it is okay, I don't need you to, and he stepped through the window. This was when I realized the person was not a man. He was a little taller than me, but covered with fur. He had a harness and a utility belt of some kind. I remember feeling pretty calm about it and really curious too. Talking isn't really the right word. He heard me before I could speak the words and answered in my head. I wanted to know how I could get through the window glass because I wasn't like him. He told me if I held his hand and trusted him, we could get through it. His hand was like ours, but the skin was different, more like a gorilla's, but smaller. We stepped on a chair near the window, and as he held my hand, he touched something on his belt, and we both stepped through the glass onto the roof outside. One of the ones outside started to do something with a box he had, and the one with me told him not yet. I could feel an annoyance from that one, and I was told it was because I was being allowed to hear what he said to them. If they replied, I would hear them too. It was like knowing someone is talking to someone in the next room, but the wall is muffling the conversation so you can't follow what they're saying. I think the no entity may have been what popular culture calls a gray. I can't get a clear picture of him in my head 60 years later, but I think it was a gray. My host and the gray had a heated but short discussion afterwards. My host told me the gray, which I'll call it, that wanted me to take something inside when I left. But my host, I honestly don't think I ever asked him his name, wanted full consent from me first, and that would require some things I didn't know about and wouldn't understand unless they fixed how I thought first, and I had to agree to that too, because I was like them, not like him. That made me more curious than ever, and I agreed. I felt I was getting hungry, and I was asked if I was hungry. 60 years later, I realized they did something that made me hungry, just like I realized years later my being so calm was probably a manipulation too. Anyway, I was given a drink, kind of like cold tomato soup, but very good, and it made me sleepy too. I woke up in the same room, but I now knew about or understood some things I had never even thought about or envisioned before. The Greys were supervisory. My host was a medical orderly or something tantamount to that. The Grey who came in before was more like a military doctor, an officer than a doctor who cared about his patients. I was then told that if I went with them to their ship, we would be back only a second after we left, but more time would pass to me. I expressed confusion, and he told me he understood that, but I should trust him, and again assured me I would be safe and would not get in trouble with my parents. I still felt really calm about it all, and I did want to see something new, so I said, okay. The taller one with the box touched it, and we were in a big room with strange lights on the walls, and I was told this was their ship, and I should come with him to a different room to talk. I asked him if I could have a belt thing that would let me walk through glass, and reply. He led me to a room with a couch and asked me to sit. I think he sat on something too, but I am not sure we talked. He asked me about my life. I asked him what he was or where he was from. He said he was from here, but hadn't lived here for a very long time, and there was people left here long ago. He asked me a lot of stuff I knew nothing about. He asked me what the sun burned, and I didn't know, and he told me it burned light gas. And I asked if that was true, and he knew that. Why was he asking me? He said something like technical level assessment test, and we played that game a few more minutes. Something else entirely different and not radiating friend at all. Came in the room and asked him things I couldn't quite understand. There was a war going on, a very old war. My host's side was losing and being hunted. The ship we were on wasn't really in normal space. It could be what it wanted to be, but it was normally inside its own space like a bubble in glass. There was some math stuff there I didn't quite get, but my host said that was okay if I understood what the firmament was and how time can be manipulated, and that it is possible to move something between points as a way of getting from point A to point C without bothering to visit point B. Our world was important to my host because it was his world, but that was a long, long time ago, and his people were no more on Earth. There were hundreds of his kind on the ship, and many, many more stored as seeds and eggs. Other animals from then too. The Greys viewed my kind, you and me, as constructs made with pieces from other beings. I think he meant DNA by those hunting this ship. Visiting Earth this way was dangerous for everyone because there were things about the ship arriving at a specific place and time that would signal its presence to anyone looking for the signals. The good news was that the detection apparatus sometimes signaled detecting something other than the ship, a false positive we call it today, and the shorter the stay, the less likely someone or something would come and look for it. I know the Earth had been hit several times during the eons of war. I'm a little vague about which side did what. It was kind of like the fight over Porkchop Hill at the end of the Korean War. Nothing at all important about the place, but neither side wanted to lose it. Once one side put a big dust cloud between Earth and the sun, anything froze for a long, long time until eventually the dust moved away or was pulled away. In an earlier time, one side invented a cold virus, and almost all of the primates died, and almost all of us died too. My host people left Earth around then, maybe a little before. I didn't ask him, I just know his people are extinct except for the ones on the ship. And I suspect he was of the race we call Homo habilis, but made smarter than the original model. It was all kind of strange bed relativity. Some of what was done hasn't been done yet. Some of what was done can be stopped by stopping the future event, but that will only work for that timeline. Timelines are about probability. Causality is usually forward in time from it to be, but sometimes with careful planning the effect can happen before the cause. Yes, I know this gets into theology debates about freedom of choice and predetermination, whatever. Anyway, what they wanted was someone to act as a spotter, like one of those Australian coast watchers during WW2, who sat by themselves on remote islands and watched for Japanese ships so they could radio the sighting. They wanted me to spot the others and signal them. If I did though, the thing was I was tired. To me, I had been there for hours, and whatever nap I had had, I still felt really tired. They told the Grey I wanted to think about it for a day at home, and I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel the noise, and he wasn't happy. I want to say he talked to the wall about it too, not an intercom thingy, but to the wall itself. With hindsight, I am thinking the ship or the wall was as much an artificial intelligence, AI, as it was a wall or a ship. I wanted to admire my host because I could feel the torrent of thought thrown at him and see him cringe. But he was adamant that he wanted my consent. The long and short of it is they made me swear up and down that I would not tell anyone about them or the experience. I was told I would be taken away and either treated in a hospital forever because my head was broken. It was how I conceptualized crazy back then. Or else lock me up in a deep vault forever to question me endlessly and how my parents wouldn't love me anymore. That was the Grey speaking, and it made me cry. But finally they brought me back to the roof, and I went inside, stepping through the window glass with my friend. He said goodbye and went back outside. I watched as they did something with the box, and they just vanished. No one was up. I went to the bathroom and then went to bed. In the morning I told my father all about the weird dream. I didn't know it yet, but as a boy he had read a lot of amazing magazines before joining the war effort for WW2 and was familiar with some of what I now knew about. He was pretty interested. He looked at the window, but other than some waves in the glass he hadn't noticed before. He didn't see anything wrong with it. However, he did see some roof tar on the chair seat and got a little worried at that. I guess it had stuck to my foot while I was on the roof until I stepped on the chair. When coming back inside, he wanted to know if I had stood on the chair and desk to reach the lock. I had never even thought of standing on the desk till he said it, and then I went outside after unlocking the window. I told him no, and he got annoyed because he thought I was lying about that. I also thought I might have snuck into the living room to watch late-night TV and maybe saw a science fiction movie which shaped my dream. The next few nights, nothing at all interesting happened. In school, Piece 33, we had been learning to associate images with written words and letters of the alphabet. There was a big chart with words under a picture: B for ball, C for cat, D for dog, and so on. I had found it hard and failed several times. The week before, after the dream, I knew the alphabet. And when the teacher gave us the book with Cinderella Runs Fast, I was like super bored. My father had a good collection of paperbacks, and I started reading them. So anyway, on the third night, the tube radio in my room began making noise again, and when I looked outside the window, the little furry friend was there. For like 50 years, I thought of them as little furries. No connection to H.B. Piper's Little Fuzzies, which I didn't read till I was... It wasn't until I saw a facial reconstruction of what Homo habilis probably looked like that I recognized my little fuzzy friends. So the trip to the ship went pretty much the same as before. This time, the Grey was taking the position. I was too young for such responsibility because I told them up front I had ignored them and told my dad, and he thinks it was a dream caused by watching some science fiction movie. The Grey discussed it with the ship and maybe some others because he left the chamber, then came back and announced that the others thought I was too young and it would probably be better to just erase the memory and send me back. My furry friend didn't like that and thought to me that he didn't like that because sometimes erasing a memory either causes hidden side effects. So once again I had to promise to not only never say anything but also only use the implant one time and only if I am sure the other race is actually here for the first time. I was told the procedure would hurt and they could deaden some of it but wouldn't enjoy it. I agreed anyway. The secret outer space signal device. How cool would that be better than a decoder ring? For sure the Grey did it. They were right. It hurt. It hurt a lot. Something small, smaller than a pea, translucent, stuck through my upper abdomen to a spot just above my liver behind a rib. I got another beverage to drink, and I was told I'd activate it if the others actually came here. Funny thing is, I have no recollection of being told how to tell an actual arrival from a false report or something I couldn't explain. I was there a long time, I think at least a day, but I don't remember a lot of it. It didn't matter anyway, because when they brought me back, it couldn't have been more than a few seconds after I left. So I was a good boy from their perspective for at least a month. My time or two. What was I? 5 years old? How long can you expect a 5-year-old to keep a secret like that? Why not do something wrong? The gray and the ship were correct. I was too young. Plus I had all this crap in my head decades before I should. Books I wanted to read. I wasn't allowed to hell. I couldn't even visit the nearby public library reference section without a parent or guardian accompanying me. The only part of the public library I was allowed to access was the children's book section, books about a kid named Sambo turning tigers into butter by running fast. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Ivanhoe, etc. Utterly useless. Meanwhile, I am trying to be good reading newspapers, some guy named Castro nationalizing oil refineries, French ship blowing up in Havana Harbor, Haiti, East and West Germany, etc. Reading the stock market page. My other world friends had told me of nuclear wars, and I knew quite a bit about Sputnik and what would probably follow. Like egg buttons, a teacher growing upset when I pointed out Hawaii would be very hard to hold in the next war if Japanese mistakes were avoided. Not what he wanted to hear. My mom bought me some shares of stock under the Miners Act, but very sadly she had let the broker talk her out of the companies I suggested and instead bought me things. The broker said so, of course. They later went belly up and she didn't transfer them when I wanted her to. Anyway, my classmates started thinking I was weird. Yeah, probably I had no proof anything at all had ever happened beyond being curious about stuff I had never cared about, and having zero interest in the things the other school kids cared about. There was only one other kid in school I could talk to. Mitchell Dupla. I didn't talk with him about little furries though, but I liked talking to him because he was the only one who usually knew about some of the things I wanted to talk about. One day the federal government took him away literally. He had been classified as a genius, and the government had set up a special school somewhere out west for such children. His father was given a government job, and the whole family just moved away and vanished. Their house went up for sale. I remember one of our teachers telling us on his last day how what his father did was very important to America, and that we should all feel honored that Mitchell was smart enough to get into such a special program in school with others like him. Even back then, it all sounded very scary and creepy to me, so I toned down my act a lot under. Chivo is good. No one comes by and makes your family disappear if you're not exceptional. Okay, one night, about a month or two in, while lying in bed, I decide I'll dream the whole thing about visitors, and just to prove that, I activate the signal device in the way I was told. Nothing happens, which proves it was all dreams. Then I go to sleep. I was awakened by a new furry shaking me in my bed and commanding me to come with him. I was like, "Who are you?" At the same time, though, I was getting out of bed and walking through the window with him without wanting to. His thoughts were not friendly, and he was brusque. In the ship's entry chamber, there were several greys, and they were angry, and was scared too. It had to do with the ship creating a small splash in the firmament each time it transcended. The foe might ignore one splash, and they left before learning if there was a reaction to the second splash. But I had sent up a signal much sooner than was expected, and it was kind of flare-like, and yeah, they saw the flare in the same spot. There had been splashes, and they were coming. The general attitude was that I had betrayed them and placed everything in grave danger. I was thinking back. I didn't believe it was real. You were all just a dream. I thought you should have given me something physical, something not important, like a uniform button or something. They didn't have uniforms I could look at and touch. When I doubted it happened, it didn't matter. They were pissed and they were about to erase my memory and also remove the device. I still couldn't move. I was just standing there totally paralyzed. I wanted to move, but nothing responded. I asked where my friend was and they didn't want to tell me. I got the impression he was being punished for arguing in favor of giving me the device without wiping my memory of it. After about 15 minutes, he came into the chamber and we went into the room where the couch was. I was made to lie down on it. There was a lot of high-level talk between him and the two greys in the room. I couldn't externally tell one grey from the other, but their voices resonated differently in my head. I was finally told they were going to remove some memory, but not all of it, and also remove what they had put in me. It hurts. I could feel that the grey didn't care. There was no drink afterwards. I was told they had to leave right away to run and hide and would never be seen by me again. I was returned to my home roof by just one furry, who didn't go inside the room with me. He just pushed me, and when I went through, the window cracked behind me. I turned around and he just vanished, and a second later the light over the roof of the apartment building on the next block also vanished. I have never had any contact since then. My dad had to fix the cracked bedroom window. I lied and told him I had been bouncing a ball and hit it by accident. He was annoyed at that, but hey, I was 5. Kids are done right. That was over 60 years ago. I taught myself computers when the Commodore came out. Since then, I worked as a federal police security guard at CIA HQ for a decade, reading the science section of their internal library every lunch break. Then, I became Pentagon police for a while and one of their criminal investigators until my wife got sick. And after leaving the government, I became a contracted special investigator for different alphabet soup agencies for a few years. In 1999, I became a contracted declassification reviewer, a job in which I was expected to process 300 pages per day, and kept that job for about a year or so after my wife died of cancer. I just got tired of spending 3 hours or more a day in my car. I am now diabetic and my eyes can't handle that anymore. So I am a retired person. My last paying job was working as a morning coffee boy for a local 711 until pandemic 2019 ended the morning rush hour crowd. My latest college degree was an S in firearms technology. Prior college experiences were government administration, political science, and civil engineering. I have never shared this before. Jack is a retired law enforcement officer as well as a former employee of the Oregon Bureau of Land Management. He has also been an avid hunter and fisherman while growing up in a rural Oregon town, so Jack had plenty of outdoor and wildlife experience. Jack and his father-in-law were on an elk hunting trip. Unfortunately, the father-in-law suffered an injury on the first day and was forced to remain at camp afterward. There was an arrangement that the father-in-law would pick up Jack at a designated time and location later in the day. The day of hunting was quite frustrating for Jack, since the elk herds were more skittish than usual. Many times the elk would easily spook and disperse. Jack spent most of the morning tracking elk through a fairly rough terrain. In fact, it was an area which he was unfamiliar. At one point, Jack found it necessary to remove some of his heavy clothing since the day was warming up and he was starting to feel a headache developing. As he started removing his jacket, placing it in his backpack, then retrieving some water, he noticed movement in his right peripheral. As he closely observed the movement, he realized that he was within 50 feet of a hairy, black creature that he didn't recognize. As Jack continued watching, he realized that this creature was upright and approximately 8 to 9 feet tall. The ears were the first feature he distinguished as they fixed high on the head and pointed. Also, the creature had a long snout, unlike that of a Sasquatch or a bear. In fact, he was close enough to see the bright yellow eyes that seemed to radiate light. The creature now watched Jack intently and was obviously upset by his presence. The creature leaned against an 8 to 10 inch diameter hardwood tree, then suddenly began shaking the tree violently. Jack didn't hear any growling or other sounds other than the tree moving back and forth. The down-bodied creature then leaned forward, dropped its ears, and studied Jack as he began to raise his 27. At this point, the creature stood fully upright. That's when Jack realized that the beast was canine-like. The body was described as looking like the werewolf in the Van Helsing film, extremely muscular with broad shoulders, a heavy upper body, a tapered waist, and thick arms and legs. Jack flipped off the safety and lightly fingered the trigger. Not knowing what to expect from the cryptid canine, he began moving toward a nearby old logging road to put distance between him and this beast. As he was walking, he looked behind him, but the creature was no longer in sight. He began moving faster on the logging road, heading in the direction where his father-in-law was scheduled to meet him. After several minutes, Jack began to hear movement in the thick brush as well as heavy footsteps. He was positive that the terrifying beast was following him. At this point, Jack swung around and released a shot from the 270 rifle in the direction of the sounds. Jack heard the creature scamper away from the area. Jace reached the rendezvous spot and waited nervously for his father-in-law just before the darkness started to descend. His father-in-law arrived as soon as Jack got into the vehicle. His father-in-law asked Jack if he was feeling okay. It was obvious that Jack was experiencing anxiety and fear after his harrowing encounter. Jack did not disclose any details of his encounter with his father-in-law or his wife. In fact, after he began to research the creature, he decided not to tell anyone. Eventually, he did tell a friend who thought that Jack was crazy. A few years back, my 3 friends and I were camping in Frontenac, Minnesota. We didn't know much about the area, just that it was a nice, heavily wooded place to camp. One night, we were headed into the tent when we heard a strange call in the distance. It was like a mixture of a moan and a yell, and it seemed to be far off. I instantly got a bad feeling and urged my friends inside. As we lay there, the sound of coyotes calling started. It sounded like a pack of them far off in the distance. I didn't think anything of it, though it had one of my friends spooked. We all attempted to sleep, but the coyotes still howled. A half hour later, all sounds stopped. The coyotes went abruptly silent. The sound of crickets disappeared, and suddenly that bad feeling was back. I remember lying perfectly still when the eerie calls from before started, and I knew something was off about them. They got closer and closer, calling regularly, almost like it was looking for someone. Suddenly, whatever was making the calls was right outside our campsite. You could hear large feet shifting on the gravel path, almost like pacing. As it called again, incredibly loud. This time I thought about getting my phone out from under my pillow to record the sound, but something in my gut told me that would be a bad idea. We were all lying frozen, listening to this thing calling. Eventually it turned back the way it came, continuing to call until the sound faded completely. The moment it did, the crickets started again, followed by the howls of the coyotes. This next day, I researched every animal call I could think of. I asked my mom, who's very attuned to wildlife, if she could recognize the call. Even the Frontenac Ranger couldn't think of what would make that sound. My research eventually revealed that Bigfoot had been sighted in Frontenac, and I instantly wondered if that's what we heard. I recently listened to one of your episodes that described a possible hellhound encounter. I believe my mom and I saw one. I was 18 when this happened about 8 years ago. I've always believed in the supernatural, even beyond ghosts and spirits. My mom, who is, in her own words, sensitive, has some issues with that. She thinks ghosts are natural and plausible, but hellhounds, etc. are too Hollywood for her. This point of view has somewhat changed, however, because she witnessed this with me and hasn't been able to explain what she saw. I live in Tennessee in a really small town that I don't feel comfortable disclosing the name of because it's that small. It's about 80 miles from Nashville, to get an idea. There have always been weird things that happened in this town. There are so many houses that are just accepted as haunted. There are streets with a few ghost stories attached, but as far as I know, the street I saw the hound on hasn't had anything of the sort. The street is literally only one over from where I live. There's a crossroads there. It was late at night, probably around 10 or 11, and my mom was driving. I was in the passenger seat, scrolling through a playlist on my phone, when suddenly there was a change in the air and I was compelled to look up. As I did, something darted across the road, something that was big and dark and too fast to be natural. When I saw it, my body went cold and rigid. Fear immediately took over my entire system and I started to cry. I don't get scared easily, and my mom knows this, and I think that's partly why she believes that really was something and not just a dog. I was shaking and still crying as we entered town, and my mom pulled over in the safety of a gas station's lights so that I could try to calm down. We don't go on the road at night anymore, we barely go during the day. I get a sense of dread every time I look in its direction. There have been a few nights since then where I've heard strange howling that doesn't match up with any of the neighborhood dogs. I know it's got to be the hound. There was another instance last year when my mom saw something dart across a road that connects to the one road and a part of the crossroads at the other end, but I didn't see it that time. She says it made her feel cold and terrified. The moment she saw it, however, and it's probably unrelated, about a year after the initial encounter, we were driving through town at sunset, and a big black dog appeared out of nowhere. We should have hit it, but it seemed to disappear beneath our tires. I pulled over and there was no evidence we hit it, but the dog was definitely there. I didn't get the same feeling as the first time. I was definitely scared, but I think it was more the prospect of wrecking. However, it didn't send me into a full-scale panic attack like the hellhound had. It was around 11 at the time, and we lived on a farm in the countryside where Paso del Toro bulls pass through the Mexican state of Veracruz, east coast of Mexico. We were coming back home from my school, which was some 10 minutes away from the farm, and my mom was singing to the tune of Lost in Love by Air Supply when she suddenly hit the brakes and drove the truck into a ditch. She was terrified, screaming that she had almost killed him. She saw a small child-looking entity, but it was dressed in old formal clothes, a black suit and one of those round hats from the 1800s, and she saw it running from between the bushes to the right side and into the ditch on the left, and when she got out, she just heard laughing. But there was no one there. Later, one of the farmhands told my mom that it was a chainik and that it was a common occurrence in those parts, that they were not inherently evil but mischievous. They were similar or may even be the same as pixies. They're child-booking in some accounts like my mom's, and they like to lead people astray. You should wear a shirt or sweater upside down to get rid of them, etc. Just found it curious for all the similarities it has with pixies. By the way, this entity had cold black skin, like really black, but even though his smile or what she managed to see if it was mischievous, she didn't think it was evil. I work on oil rigs. I have since I was 20 and I am 33 now. In 27, I was working for Nomad Drilling. They have since sold out to Patterson. And we were drilling in the Haynesville area for natural gas. Anyone who works on rigs knows that the work can take you way off the beaten path from what normal civilization is used to. Some places you're on ranch roads for an hour before you reach the location, and others you're driving on roads canopied by trees in the backwoods of Louisiana. This happened to me. In the latter, we were rigging down after finishing a well, and we were on our last night of the 7-day hitch about halfway through our 12-hour tour, and we had pretty much finished and were making sure everything was tied down securely for the rig move. We killed the light plants and the driller. Let us knock off early. This area was accessible outside Halton, Louisiana, and the lease was actually on the back of the Barksdale aft base, but we had to leave the way we came in. Driving home at 2 in the morning seemed pretty normal at first, and I made it to the blacktop with no issues. The blacktop was still canopied by trees, otherwise than the lights from my truck. Everything was pitch black. Out of nowhere, we were still basically in the middle of nowhere. This thing appeared almost close enough to get hit on my driver's side. Okay, weird, but even more strange, he was leaning at what I swear was an impossible angle for someone not to tip over. It was stretched, reaching out towards my truck, and what I could see of the face was morbid and twisted. The hairs on the back of my neck raised, and I gasped it to speed back closer to society. It was about a 2-hour drive home, and I felt off the rest of the trip. More oddly, I was working over one separate occasion with one of the crews that work when I'm home, and another hand was talking about a very similar, if not identical, experience. I don't know who or what I saw. The face could have been a blur from relative distance, speed, and time. I actually saw them, but who was out that late, and why? If someone was brought down, I could see them trying to flag me down, but this didn't seem to be the case here. I live in Little Rock, Arkansas. I am so glad I found your website. I found it by Googling large flying thing with 20-foot wings. Over the years, I have stepped outside my home at night just walking around, often to look up at the stars. I love the night sky and find it beautiful and mysterious. Back in 2017, I went outside after sunset, around 10 p.m. I looked to the south side above my home. I couldn't believe it, but I saw a large winged thing on my roof. It spread its wings and swooped toward me. I couldn't move. I remember its wings were wider than the length of my house. It flew around and was gone. I thought, what was that? I only would see it randomly other times. I'd come outside around dusk. I would see a black flying thing the size of a hummingbird swoop around my yard going extremely fast. Then it would disappear. On October 10th, 2020, I was sitting at the drive-thru at a Wendy's here in Little Rock, Arkansas. I had ordered food and then drove up in line. I heard someone running near my vehicle. I looked behind me and saw a dark winged thing flying over the back of my vehicle. I looked at the cars behind me and wondered if anyone else had seen anything, but I didn't get out to ask. This was troubling to me. I thought, is this some bad omen taunting me? Because back when I saw this thing around my home, bad things would happen, bad luck things, relationship problems, water pipes bursting in my house, car problems, sewer backup, lost my job. I'm not scared, and I'm still scared. I got holy water, sprinkled it in my yard, and burned white sage outside and inside, praying to God for protection. I don't need anything else bad coming my way. I just got my transmission fixed, and since I saw this large winged monster, my engine light is on. Thanks for listening, Horror Cowboys. See you tomorrow at the same time.